Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Had the Powers of Light and Darkness and Meet Daredevil Part 1. Before we start, please go support the Salary per 301 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Issei is a male in this story. Prologue. Authors Pav. We found ourselves in a city in Japan called Kuo. This city was like any other city, having typical things like work buildings, schools and academies, shopping centers, among other things. Although we will focus on a part of the city, being a park in which we can see how a 5-year-old boy was hiding behind some bushes, panting tiredly to peek out a little, trying to find someone with his eyes. However, "I found you," Ataudo exclaimed, a cheerful tone of a girl who hugged the boy from behind, scaring him. "So here you were," Issei said, the tired tone of a child who was 6 years old, like the girl who hugged the aforementioned called Issei. These three children were none other than Takeda, Kurumi and Issei Hayadu, and even though it may not seem like it, Takeda and Kurumi are semi-identical twins. And of course, that had left both the Hayadu and other people astonished, not to say shocked, upon learning that, but the oldest was undoubtedly Takeda, being 12 minutes older than Kurumi, even though she was the one who led her siblings, as if she were the oldest. But back to before, the three brown-haired brothers were playing hide and seek in the park, and now, it was Issei's turn to count from 0 to 30, while leaning against a tree with his eyes closed. By the time he finished counting, he shouted, "Ready or not, I'm coming," but the moment he turned around to look for his brothers, he found a 7-year-old girl, with peculiar crimson-red hair similar to blood and greenish-blue eyes. "Excuse me for interrupting you, but could I play with you?" she said, asked in an embarrassed tone, while Issei just looked at her and sighed, only to turn around leaning back against the tree. "Issei. Go hide, I'll count again," he said with his eyes closed, bringing a big smile full of joy to the girl. "Thank you very much," he exclaimed happily, running off to hide while Issei was counting back from 0 to 30. "Issei. Well, ready or not, I'm going," he exclaimed, opening his eyes and turning around to find his brothers and the girl. For the next few minutes, Issei began to search for his siblings, having managed to find Kurumi hanging from a tree branch, and with her was the red-haired girl. Of course, when he saw them, he didn't hesitate and ran as fast as he could towards the tree where he had counted, being followed by both girls who obviously had to have first gotten down from the tree they were hanging from. Although both girls were about to reach Issei, well, the aforementioned was about to reach the tree, but someone passed by him, being none other than Takeda, who managed to get past him and reach the tree before him by putting his hand on it. "Takeda. Chop for all my companions," he exclaimed, causing Kurumi and the girl to celebrate the victory, while Issei had no choice but to accept defeat. "Issei. You may have won this round, but I will win the next one," he exclaimed with a firm and determined tone, making Takeda smile as he only approached his brother. "Takeda. I'm sure you will, Issei," he said with a confident tone, stroking his younger brother's head. "Takeda. By the way, who is that girl?" he said, asked with a curious tone, looking and pointing at the red-haired girl. "Issei. I don't know, she asked me to play with us, so I accepted," he said with a somewhat carefree tone, to which Takeda and he decided to go and introduce themselves to the girl. Without further ado, both brown-haired brothers went to where Kurumi and the girl were, who were talking about trivial things and seemed to get along well, despite the fact that they had only met a few minutes ago. "Kurumi. Ria-san, these are my brothers. This one here is Takeda, my twin, and this little one is Issei," she said with a very lively tone, introducing her brothers to the girl named Rias. "Rias. Nice to meet you, I'm Rias Gremory," she said in a lively tone, introducing herself to the two male siblings, although Issei's eyes seemed to be shaped like stars. "Issei. You're from abroad, right?" he said, asked in a childish way, approaching Rias, who just smiled nervously. "Rias. Why, yes, I come from Scandinavia," she said with a somewhat nervous tone, surprising both Issei and Takeda, the latter of whom was mesmerized by Ria's red hair. "Kurumi. Hey, how about we keep playing?" she said, asked in a lively and childish tone, since they weren't doing anything other than wasting time. Seeing nothing wrong with it, the four children began to play classic and typical games such as tag, hide and seek, and even played soccer with other kids, etc. They did all that and more until the sun began to set and a beautiful silver-haired woman wearing a French-maid outfit arrived at the park to take them away. The three brothers had no choice but to say goodbye to Rias, and so did she, although the Ritids seemed to be sad when doing so. But the next day the Hayadu brothers had returned to the park, surprised and happy to have met Rias there. Time skip. 5 years have passed since the Hayadu brothers met Rias back then, but let's start at the beginning. The first 7 months, these four children managed to forge and enlarge a friendship that grew with the passage of time, doing all kinds of things together. Until one day they managed to meet Shido Arena, a girl of the same age as Takeda and Kurumi, although she pretended to be a boy by dressing like one and using his last name as a name. Since she was a girl, all the boys she wanted to play with rejected her, and she thought that cross-dressing would be a good idea to get them to accept her. But Kurumi and Riaz, upon learning of this, advised Irina to be as she really is, which at first the brunette refused to do but in the end she did, presenting herself to Takeda and Issei as a girl, something that surprised both brothers because they never realized that Irina was a girl, but they accepted her anyway. However, Irina was not the only one who joined that group, but also Sona Citri, a girl of the same age as Riaz, joined in, and these two were friends from a very young age. At first Sona was someone shy, reserved and very shy, but as the days and weeks went by, she gained more confidence as well as appreciation for her new friends. Everything was going relatively well between them, they didn't argue, and they didn't have any problems either, until it started to go relatively badly, because some boys started to bother them and make fun of them, either because of Ria's red hair, Sona's fanaticism with chess or Irina's belief in God. This caused the annoyance and anger of the Haidu brothers, but more so in Takeda, who one day did not hesitate and hit one of those boys, being followed and copied by his brothers who went to his aid. Although they were not alone, if not Riaz, Sona and Irina helped them from afar by throwing rocks at the boys who bothered her and even joined in the fight, managing to make them flee. And anyone would have thought that those kids weren't going to bother them anymore, but that didn't happen. Instead, they came back again and again, almost becoming a daily routine, and if those kids didn't bother them, they were going to bother others. However, one day Kurumi came up with the idea of inventing a game, which they were going to use as their ace up their sleeve against those boys. Of course, they caught the attention of Takeda and Issei, who to start with, swore among the three of them not to tell or say anything to their friends. That game took them weeks, if not months, to practice and perfect, but when the day came that they put it to use, it left Irina more than impressed, Sona already laughing at the incredible coordination that the Haidu brothers had at that moment, being more than enough to make the boys who were bothering them leave and never come back. After that day, the Chestnut brothers and their friends decided to call that game the Triple Haidu Combination, because they were the ones who created it and only the three of them could do it. And without them knowing or realizing, 7 good months had passed since they met and became best friends. However, one day something very unexpected and somewhat strange happened for the Haidu family. On that day Riaz and Sona had appeared in front of Takeda's parents, Kurumi and Issei, up to there everything was normal without problems. Until they said and claimed to be pure-blooded devils, showing 2 pairs of wings which seemed to be those of a bat in the process. Of course that undoubtedly left Goru and Izumi Haidu as well as their children more than stunned, but they still let both girls speak, protecting their children and themselves using a crucifix that Irina's father had given them. Riaz and Sona, being a considerable distance away from the crucifix, proceeded to tell and explain the things that were and happened in the supernatural world. One of those things was the Great War that took place between the 3 biblical factions hundreds of years ago, about the sacred gears that God granted to humans, and also telling them which demonic houses they belonged to. If it weren't for their demon wings, the little magic show they put on, and the explanation they were given, you would have no doubt believed that they were little girls living in a big fantasy world that their parents had introduced them to. With many doubts and insecurities, they accepted these 2 girls and allowed them to remain friends with their children, but they still made sure to keep crucifixes, holy water, and a Bible hidden away in case it came in handy one day. But as the weeks went by, little by little the Haidu family began to trust and have a little appreciation for both demons, even Irina, who also found out that her 2 friends were demons, but accepted them anyway, although she kept it a secret from her parents. However, on a common day like any other in the Haidu house, Takeda and Kurumi along with their friends quickly went down to the first floor, going to the living room, showing their parents and their younger brother their sacred gears which they released with the help of Riaz and Sona. And to the surprise of the adult and minor Haidu, Takeda was the bearer of one of the 13 Longinus, being more specific the bearer of the boosted gear where the soul of Drake Gotch, the celestial dragon of domination, resides. While Kurumi possessed a sacred gear that Riaz and Sona were unaware of its existence, being a katana with a chain on the handle. Although Takeda was the current Tsukuyote, Riaz warned him that if the factions were to find out that the Red Dragon Emperor had awakened, they would try to find him and offer him all kinds of deals, as long as he joined them. And for that reason, she offered Takeda to join her peerage in the future, because not only would he have benefits such as a long lifespan or better physical ability, but he would also receive the protection of the Gremory clan. Of course Takeda consulted with his parents, who advised him to accept because they feared for the safety of their firstborn, something that Takeda accepted, but Riaz swore to him that not only would he have the protection of the Gremory clan, but also the entire Haidu family. But not wanting to let her brother be the only one on the side of the demons, Kurumi offered to join Sona's nobility in the future, something that undoubtedly took the Citri by surprise, since she hadn't seen it coming. However, someone was missing, and that someone was none other than Issei, who couldn't say a single word because he was so amazed to see the sacred gears his brothers possessed. For a moment, Issei even imagined having a sacred gear like his brothers, so he could become a hero saved and protecting everything he considers very, very important, suddenly becoming a dream and a goal that he was determined to fulfill. Unable to contain his excitement any longer and wanting to be one step closer to fulfilling his dream, Issei asked how he could release his sacred gear, to which Riaz and Sona explained to him step by step how he had to do it. However, Issei tried to do it several times and even tried different methods with the help of both devils, but nothing. Issei did not show or give any sign that he was going to release his sacred gear. Making everyone and the brunette himself think that he was not the possessor of a sacred device, that partly discouraged Issei, since he believed that he was not going to become the hero he imagined himself to be a few minutes ago. But his parents, brothers and even his friends cheered him up by telling him that it did not matter and that if he wanted to become stronger to protect them, there were other ways to be stronger without the need to have a sacred gear. That certainly made the little brown-haired boy very happy, who realized that he was not and would never be alone, not if he was with his family and friends. During the next days, weeks and even months, Issei continued to look at him, forgetting that he did not have a sacred gear. But what he couldn't forget and what he asked himself 100 times was, why do they become more and more distant with me? Because for some strange and inexplicable reason, his family as well as his friends were moving away from him over time, as if what they told him was just a lie. Until one day, a great feeling of fury clung to Issei. Flashback. We can see how the last and youngest of the Hyadu was in the park on a swing swinging alone, feeling somewhat sad and lonely, since in part it affected him that his loved ones were ignoring him as if nothing. Although Issei could notice on the ground how 4 shadows were approaching where he was, so without hesitation he looked up, finding 4 boys between 10 and 12 years old who stood in front of him. Boy 2. But look who we have here, the baby of the group, said one of the children, having a big smile on his face as Issei got off the swing. Issei. What do you want? Asked a brown-haired boy, facing them and realizing that he had no chance of making them flee. Boy. 1. Look, the baby learned to stand and talk, he said mockingly, making his classmates laugh and angering Issei. Issei. Isn't it difficult for you to talk with those pig cheeks you have? He said in a mocking tone towards the first boy, who was very overweight, something that bothered him quite a bit. Boy 4. Hey, calm down, we have plenty of time to have fun with him, he said, stopping his friend, who only proceeded to clench his fists, making the others smile. Boy 1. You will pay for everything that you, your brothers and your friends did to us, he said in a somewhat threatening tone, while Issei stood there. He knew that if he ran away they would catch up with him and give him a worse beating than he would receive later, so he decided to face them without fear, knowing full well that he was completely inferior to them. After a big and ugly beating, we can see how Issei was going towards his house, having his left eye bruised as well as his cheeks and a small cut on his lower right lip, along with a stream of blood coming out of his nose. But despite that, the little brown-haired boy touched his knuckles, which hurt a lot because they were destroyed, since he not only managed to hit those boys with rocks or tree branches as he was used to doing, but he was also able to hit them with his own fists. After walking for a few minutes, Issei arrived home and was surprised to find that his parents and siblings were not there, which made him sad, but he still decided to go to the kitchen to clean the blood and put an ice pack on the swollen areas. Having already done that, Issei was now going to sit on the sofa in the living room with an ice pack on his left eye and the television remote in his other hand. He just sat down and turned on the television. The news channel was on, which reported that a gang of criminals was arrested by a person disguised in a red suit and who had some kind of similarity to a demon or something like that. Although Issei ignored all that and proceeded to press one of the buttons on the remote control, putting on the cartoon channel, which was playing one of his favorite shows, being nothing more than Power Rangers. However, the brown-haired boy was wandering in his thoughts, completely ignoring the program. He couldn't get it out of his head that he was someone weak, and that was something that bothered him a lot, because when his brothers became demons, they were going to have great advantages, as well as longevity and physical strength, as Ria said. But she omitted that if they became high-class demons, they would be able to obtain land and their own evil pieces to reincarnate whoever. On the subject of longevity, nobility and lands, it was not something that mattered much to Issei, but what did matter to him was that he would not be able to compare to them in anything, he would only become useless. Wanting to be quiet and in a comfortable place, Issei turned off the television and then proceeded to lock all the windows and doors in case someone came to break in or something like that. Having done that, the little brown-haired boy began to climb the stairs towards his room, and once there, he looked out his window watching as the sun was setting, revealing a beautiful sunset. But Issei managed to hear some things like cars passing near his house, the barking of some dogs, and he even heard something above him, to which he proceeded to look up, finding a cat that was on the roof of his house. Ignoring all that, Issei stared at the sunset for a few long minutes until it got dark. He only saw the stars, being fascinated not only by that, but also by the beautiful sky. Issei. I wonder if there's something else up there, he said with a curious tone, wanting to know if on the other side of the sky there is some kind of life, be it alien or perhaps divine. But the peace that Issei had at that moment was interrupted by the sound of a car parking at his house, realizing that it was his parents' car, since he knew very well the noise it made when the vehicle was parked. The little brown-haired boy was going to greet his parents, but before doing that he heard someone yelling, so out of pure curiosity he looked out the window, listening to an argument between some people and his parents. Although being far away it was difficult for him to hear clearly what was happening. Although he still decided to go down to open the door for his parents, but when he was halfway up the stairs he saw how the main door opened, revealing his parents and siblings, who entered, but not before taking off their shoes. Issei. "Tusan, Ka-chan, where did you go and why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" he said asked in a curious tone as he walked down the stairs. "Boru. Issei, I want you to explain to me, why did you hit those kids in the park?" he said asked demandingly, to which Issei remembered the discussion from a while ago, realizing everything. Issei. "Tusan, those children are lying, they were the ones who." He didn't finish speaking because his father interrupted him. "Boru. Don't lie to me, Issei, those kids told me they wanted to play with you, but you started throwing rocks at them and used large branches to hit them," he exclaimed in a serious tone, leaving Issei silent since in part yes, he hurt those boys by throwing several rocks at them, and to hit them he used very large branches, but he did all of that in self-defense. Issei. "Those kids are lying, Tusan. They've always been bothering us. Takita Nai, Wani-chan, you know I don't lie, right?" he said asked, looking at his brothers, knowing that they would support him, but. "Kurumi. I'm sorry, but I don't believe you," she said in a tone full of pity, looking away. Takita. "Issei, they apologized for everything they did to us a long time ago, and Arena, Riaz and Sona were there when they did it. We've even been hanging out with them to play, and I can assure you that they've changed," he said with a confident tone, but also with pity for not being able to help his brother, who was just surprised by what they said. Issei. But he didn't finish speaking because he ended up receiving a slap courtesy of his father, leaving Issei in shock while his mother and brothers said nothing. Boru. "Starting today you will be grounded, Issei, tomorrow we will go to those boys' houses and you will apologize for hitting them, understood?" he said asked in a serious and authoritative tone, causing Issei to clench his teeth and fists in fury, however. Issei. "Understood," he said reluctantly, walking up the stairs and heading to his room without saying a single word. Then flashback. The next day after that happened, Issei went to the house of the boys he hit accompanied by his parents, being forced to bow and apologize in a sincere way for having hit them. Although the brunette had to make a great effort not to jump on them and attack them, because those boys made fun of him through small and subtle facial expressions and even hand signs. But as if that weren't enough, those boys began to use Issei as if he were some kind of puppet, demanding things from them or for him to do them, because if he didn't do them, they would go to their parents to lie to them, without even leaving some options for Issei, who reluctantly did everything they asked. Having endured a lot of taunts and demands for weeks, Issei could no longer take it anymore and his patience ran out, letting his inner rage blind and control him. Going to where those boys were and once he found them, Issei brutally beat the 4 boys, leaving them in a not very nice state despite having the scales of disadvantage on his side. However, to Issei's surprise and bad luck, his brothers as well as his friends witnessed what he did from beginning to end. On that same day at night, Issei was beaten by his father, who told him you like to hit, then get up and hit me. But while that was happening, his mother and siblings were in the living room, completely ignoring what Goru was doing. After that day, Issei was forbidden to go outside to play. The only thing the little brown-haired boy did was stay locked in his room, wanting to know how or why his family and friends became mean to him. But just like that, one morning Issei woke up hanging in the basement of his house, causing him enormous fear, starting to scream the name of his parents and his brothers so that one of them would free him, which he achieved because his entire family came down. But not only them were there but also his friends, although seeing them all he could notice that there was something different about them, but he didn't know what, that those people in front of him were not his family and his friends, but they were someone or something else. For the next few days, weeks, months, and even years, Issei was inexplicably tortured by his family and friends for no apparent reason. For a moment, Issei even thought he was going to die from his injuries, but Riaz and Sona used a kind of liquid that had completely healed the brunette's wounds, avoiding any risk of death or any wounds remaining, whether internal or external, on his body. And being locked up, Issei had no kind of certainty about the minutes, hours, days, weeks, months or years that passed. They just kept him hanging in that dark and cold basement, as if nothing had happened. He even tried to ask his family or friends for an explanation as to why they were doing this to him, but they didn't even deign to say a single word. Having no choice but to resist as best he could, Issei barely managed to endure the torture at the hands of his family, in addition to the seasons of the year, but especially autumn and winter. He even managed to endure a week and a half without the need to eat or drink something, among other things. The only way he could stay conscious was to listen to the sounds and noises coming from outside. He could even notice how his hearing had improved a lot, but his vision not so much, because it became very blurry at times, and he received strong and severe pain in his eyes. He even felt a very unbearable burning sensation. And as if that were not enough, he also had sudden headaches, nausea and vomiting, becoming more and more frequent, until one day. Issei woke up unable to see anything. The only thing he could see was an enormous and intense darkness, without even being able to see a trace of light, something that made him very desperate. At that very moment Issei entered into great despair, having lost not only his sight but even his sanity, wishing for only one thing: death. Current affairs. Right now in the present, we can see how a completely wounded, malnourished and thirsty 10-year-old Issei was lying on one of the streets of the city of Kuo. The brown-haired boy was face up looking at the sky, still curious if there could be some kind of life there. He just lay there waiting for death to come to him. He wasn't afraid of dying after all he wanted was to have peace, to forget all the harm his loved ones did to him. However, Issei could hear someone approaching him quickly, although he did not even intend to look at that person, because he could not see anything, but that person who was approaching Issei was a man wearing a completely red suit. Having a mask with 2 horns on his forehead and red glasses on his chest, he had a kind of logo having only 2 letters DD on his forearms. There were some kind of red bandages or whips, and in a sheath located on his left leg, there were 2 batons. Curse, his pulse is going down, he thought seriously, realizing that Issei could die, so without wasting time he chooses to carry him bridal style to take him to the nearest hospital. Issei. Leave me here, don't save me, he said in a very weak tone, which surprised the man who was carrying him. Don't give me that kind of joke, Kitty exclaimed in a serious and annoyed manner, running as fast as he could. Issei. Please do it, he said in a pleading tone, only to fall unconscious, but still have some life left, something the man noticed. I'm not going to let you die, Kitty said in a firm tone, doing his best to increase his speed. Change of scene. Right now we can see a 38-year-old man sitting in the corridor of a hospital, while next to him was a blonde woman of about 35 years old. Both were in a somewhat awkward and deathly silence, being worried, sad and angry for some reason. Were you able to find any clue or trace of who could have left that child there? Matt, said, asked with a serious tone mixed with some anger, looking at the man he seemed to know. Matt. No, I couldn't find anything, Karen, and I don't know if it's me or this world is getting sicker and crazier, he said in a serious tone, squeezing the cane he had in his hands with some force and helplessness. Mr. Murdoch, said a man of about 48 years old, dressed as a doctor, who was heading towards where both adults were. Matt. What do you have to tell us, doctor? How's the boy? He said, asked in a worried tone, making the man sigh. Doctor. The boy is fine, we were able to stabilize him, so he is not in any danger of dying, he said, causing Matt and Karen to feel relieved upon hearing that. Doctor. However, 35% of his body is covered in scars, burns and bruises, along with other marks that we couldn't identify. He has at least 24 bones that haven't healed properly, and he hasn't eaten or drank anything for at least 1 or 2 weeks, he said in a somewhat serious tone, leaving both people speechless. Doctor. And last but not least, we have taken advantage of the opportunity to perform some tests on your eyes, and we received the results that you have angle closure glaucoma in both eyes. This must have been inherited from your father, mother, and perhaps even from an uncle or grandfather who had it before, he said, having finished describing the entire report that he managed to compile in 78 hours. Doctor. Let me tell you, Mr. Murdoch, that you are a hero. Perhaps if you had not brought him here as soon as possible, that boy would have died, and by the way, I will take your secret to the grave, he said with a firm and confident tone, extending his hand towards Matt, who simply shook it. Matt. Thank you for everything, doctor, he said in a grateful tone, to which the doctor didn't say anything else and left, but when he did. Karen. What kind of scum is capable of doing that to a child? She exclaimed furiously, mixed with helplessness, throwing her bag because of the outburst she had. Matt. We better calm down, Karen, and if we want answers, we're going to have to be patient and wait until that kid wakes up, he said in a serious tone, trying to calm the blonde down, although he would be lying to himself if he said he wasn't angry. Karen. Sigh, okay, I'll go get some air, and I'll put my name on the visitors list, she said while she slowly calmed down, just to go and pick up her bag. Matt. I will do the same too. Time skip. 5 whole months passed since Issei was admitted by Matt to the Kuo hospital, having woken up 3 weeks after that happened, to which the doctor undoubtedly contacted Karen and Matt, who quickly went to visit the brown-haired boy. When they arrived, they introduced themselves, although Issei didn't say anything, he just remained silent, staring into space, something that the doctor informed them was normal, because he dealt with patients who went through a traumatic experience, and it took them several days to speak or say something, and Issei was no exception. So Karen and Matt chose to be patient, giving Issei all the time and space he needed to recover, but that didn't mean they were going to visit him from time to time, having bought him some things, like a stuffed animal and a book for him to learn Braille and entertain himself a little. After a few long days, the brown-haired boy was able to return to his senses and began to speak, which in part made Karen very happy, but Matt asked him to tell who hurt him, causing Issei to enter into great anguish and despair, all of that mixed with fear. That had completely worried Karen and Matt who, by doctor's orders, had to leave the room, but Matt couldn't help but feel guilty about what had happened, since if he hadn't said that there was a possibility that Issei wouldn't have gotten that way. However, a few days after that event, Issei deigned to tell Matt and Karen what happened to him, what his family and friends did to him, causing Karen's blood to boil with rage, while the brown-haired boy continued with his story. By the time the brown-haired boy finished telling everything that happened, Karen offered Issei the opportunity to sue his parents and that they could go to jail, but the brown-haired boy refused to do that, saying, "No, I'm not going to do that. Those people weren't my parents, neither were my brothers and my friends, they weren't them, I'm pretty sure of that." Karen couldn't help but feel sorry for Issei, not only for what he said, but for the tone in his voice and how broken his mind, heart, and even soul was. She was almost certain that Issei might have developed some kind of disorder, like post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD) or something else. But by the time Issei was discharged, Karen offered to give him asylum in her house, something that partly confused the brunette since he thought she was only visiting him out of pity and because she wanted to send his parents to jail. Although when he realized that she was alone and that she was not going to get anywhere with her blindness, so with some distrust, he accepted Karen's gesture. Who noticed that making the blonde prepare to give Issei a place where he can feel safe and call it a home, maybe it sounded a bit exaggerated after all they were two strangers, but her voice of conscience did not allow her to leave Issei alone. The first few days of living together were a bit complicated since, let's say, he didn't behave well or badly with Karen because he had a great distrust of her, despite the fact that she and Matt paid his medical expenses, in addition to having provided him with a roof, a bed and almost daily meals. However, the reason why he did that is because he couldn't get out of his head that Karen or Matt were going to do the same thing to him that his family did to him, since he had many nightmares about that to the point that he couldn't sleep. However, every time he woke up all agitated and scared, Karen ran to his room to hug him, which helped him calm down in part. Making the brunette feel grateful to her and realizing that his behavior with Karen was not correct. Thus taking the first step himself, Issei little by little began to gain confidence with Karen, getting along better and better as time went by, even with some of her help his nightmares lessened a little. But leaving that aside, they occasionally received visits from Matt, who was in charge of helping Issei learn to read Braille, although he also took advantage of that to get to know and become close to the brown-haired boy, something he achieved. The people he had been wary of from the start eventually became precious to the brown-haired boy as the weeks and months went by, and despite the fact that he only saw a completely dark space, 2 rays of light had entered that space, brightening his day every time he woke up. Present. We can see how Karen was heading towards the kitchen after taking Issei to his room. The blonde was going to wash the dishes they ate on, but when she arrived, she saw how Matt was washing them. "Karen. You didn't have to do it, Matt, I could have done it," she said in a somewhat sad tone, to which the man shook his head. "Matt. You cooked, so I didn't see anything wrong with me washing the dishes," he said in a calm tone, while Karen went to pour herself some water. "Matt. How is Issei?" he said asked with a somewhat worried tone, having finished washing everything. "Karen. He's fine, his nightmares aren't as frequent as before and neither are the after effects. He's getting better little by little. Although I'm planning to take him to a psychologist or a psychiatrist that will help me find out what he has and I'll be able to help him better than I'm doing now on my own," she said in a somewhat doubtful and insecure tone, while Matt sighed a little tired. "Matt. I don't want you to take what I'm going to say the wrong way, Karen, but what if that doesn't happen? What if the cure ends up being worse than the disease?" he said asked in a somewhat sad tone, while Karen just nodded. "Karen. Yes, for a moment I also thought about that. For that reason I chose to continue helping him in my own way, but if he continues with this nightmare or with its after effects, I will have no choice but to take him to the psychologist or the psychiatrist, or maybe I will have to take him to both," she said with a confident tone, since the only thing she wanted was Issei's well-being. "Matt. I guess that's for the best, he said with a somewhat disappointed tone, something that Karen noticed, and she approached the blind man. Karen. You don't look very happy, Matt, was it because of what I said? She said, asked in a somewhat serious tone, to which Matt just shook his head. Matt. No, it's not that, it's that during these days I've been thinking about wanting to train Issei, but not before asking your permission to do so, of course, he said with a sincere tone, making Karen throw her hair back. Karen. Sigh, please Matt, don't tell me you want to make him your successor so he can be the next Daredevil. She said, asked with a serious and somewhat annoyed tone, looking at her ex-boyfriend. Matt. The last thing I want, Karen, is for Issei to be my successor as Daredevil. All I want to do is for him to learn to move without the need for a cane 24 hours a day, or not depend on someone all the time, he said in a sincere tone, making the blonde give a small sarcastic laugh. Matt. It's just that, I swear, he said, still with that sincere tone, to which Karen just looked at him seriously. Karen. I hate it when you're right, she said with a somewhat annoyed tone, because that could give Issei a great benefit. Karen. Okay, I'll let you train him. But if you dare to teach Issei even one fighting move, you better start getting a coffin and a tombstone with your name Matt Murdock on it, she said in a threatening and firm tone, to which Matt accepted that condition. Time skip again. After that day, 5 years passed, but we will go from the beginning. A few days after Karen and Matt had that conversation, the blind man told the brunette that he was Daredevil, or the devil of Hell's Kitchen, for his friends. Well, that certainly surprised Issei, and he was even more surprised to hear that he would train him to know how to use his senses, such as hearing and even smell, as his new eyes, and of course Issei accepted without thinking twice, since the last thing he wanted to be was a hindrance in Karen's life. However, when Matt and Issei were not training, the brunette was studying with Karen because the blonde had enrolled him in one of the Kuo elementary schools, something that was too complicated since Issei had no knowledge of the first grades of elementary school, having been locked in a basement for 5 years. So having no choice, Karen began to teach him the basic study things that children learn in elementary school, in addition to helping him with his homework and paying for a private tutor. But thanks to Issei putting so much effort and commitment into his studies, he was able to obtain great and fast results. And thanks to that, in 1 year and having achieved it by just a few points, the chestnut was able to enter 4th grade, having skipped the first 3 years of primary school, which was undoubtedly a huge achievement for someone who had the disability of not being able to see. However, one day Issei noticed something different in Karen and Matt, reminding him of the same change that his biological family and friends had before they did those horrible things to him. But unlike them, neither of them distanced themselves or dared to raise their hand to him. Matt and Karen were still the same as always. Even though Issei was still unsure and doubtful that it was really them, he decided to ignore it and get rid of those doubts and insecurities, willing to continue with his new life and being completely sure that nothing bad was going to happen in the future. Although for some strange reason, Matt began to train Issei in martial arts and mixed arts, in addition to teaching him the practice of batons in case using his fists was not enough. Of course, that was too complicated for Issei, since he had no fighting experience, and on top of that, at that time, he still wasn't used to using senses other than his eyes. And when the brunette wasn't training with the devil of Hell's Kitchen, he spent his time studying either alone or with Karen's help. However, on a day that was completely normal for Karen and Issei, who were having breakfast at the time, the brown-haired boy's head began to hurt out of nowhere, the pain becoming more and more intense, while Karen saw how all the objects in her house began to float by magic. Flashback. Karen was surprised, not to say stunned, to see what was happening, but the blonde stopped focusing on that and focused on an 11-year-old Issei, who was moaning loudly in pain, feeling like his head was about to explode. Issei. Silence, he exclaimed in a somewhat pleading tone, causing all the objects in the house to fall to the floor. However, a few seconds after that happened, several shapeless white figures appeared as if nothing had happened in Karen's house, leaving Issei completely shocked as he could not only feel their presence, but he could even see them. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Issei, said all the white figures in unison, having been heard by Karen and the same brown-haired boy, who were left speechless because of that. Issei. Who are you and how do you know me? He said, asked with a confused and surprised tone, receiving the answer from a woman. We are spirits of light, Mr. Issei, and we know you because we have been watching for a while, he said, generating many questions in the aforementioned's head. Issei. Why? Why have you been watching me? He said, asked with a confused tone, distrusting them and approaching Karen. Because among all the people in the world, you received the gift of clairvoyance, he said, leaving Karen and Issei completely silent. Note. Clairvoyance is a psychic power possessed by a certain number of people who are able to see ghosts, end of note. Issei. Are there people with this clairvoyance as you say? He said, asked with a curious tone, not being able to hide his surprise. That's right, those people are not only able to see us, but they are also able to see the spirits of darkness and the wandering spirits, the latter of whom wander aimlessly throughout the entire world, he said in a somewhat serious tone, making Issei and Karen not like the idea of becoming a wandering spirit. You have two options, Mr. Issei, accept us or reject us. If you accept us, we will do everything you want, and if you reject us we will accept your decision, and you will never hear from us again, she said in a firm tone, while Issei began to think about what decision to make until he approached and extended his hand towards her. Issei. Just call me Issei or you can give me whatever nicknames you want, he said in a somewhat kind tone, surprising the spirit who didn't waste time and shook the brown-haired boy's hand. Mio. My name is Mio, it will be a pleasure to be by your side, Issei, he said with a somewhat happy tone. Issei. The feeling is mutual. But I would like to ask you 3 favors, if it is not a problem, he said, looking at the spirits around him. Mio. What do you need? He said, asked with a curious tone, to which Issei raised his right hand. Issei. The first and most important thing is that you are my eyes, I want to be aware of what may happen around me. Second, and as I said before, I don't want formalities, just treat me like anyone else. And third, but less important, just as I will count on you, you can count on me for whatever you need, I will try to do everything in my power, he said with a confident tone, leaving all the spirits silent. Issei. Is it clear? He said, asked in an uncurious tone, to which Mio seemed to have nodded. Mio. It's more than clear, Issei, she said with a confident and firm tone, causing Issei to not say anything else. Then flashback. Having new friends, so to speak, Issei began a special training with the spirits of light, who told the brown-haired boy where he had to go or what he had to do, but he had to do it following the voices of the spirits. But when Matt came to visit, he would join in on the training to help him a little, and then continue training him in hand-to-hand combat, as well as teaching him types of stances and giving him different types of advice, so he could improve his reaction speed. It took an entire year for Issei to learn all of that, but it was undoubtedly something that was worth it, since Issei did not need a cane to walk, but he could do it thanks to his developed senses, and thanks to the help of the spirits who told him everything at the moment, and he managed to react a few seconds later. Although the spirits and Issei managed to gain confidence thanks to the training they had over the months, the brown-haired boy had become fond of Mio, who was apparently a kind of leader for the spirits of light. Although everything was going great in Issei's new life, everything started to go even better when Karen and Matt not only confessed to him that they were going to get married and that he would go live with them in Tokyo, but they also told him that they were going to adopt him. Issei gladly and happily accepted, as he not only had great appreciation and affection for them for what they did for him, but he even considered them his own parents. After a long process, Matt and Karen got married, and as if that were not enough, on Issei's 12th birthday, he was adopted by Matt and Karen, bearing the surname Murdoch from that day on, in addition to having moved to a quiet neighborhood in Tokyo. The first few weeks began to go well for these three. Matt and Karen managed to open their own law office. After all, they had the studies. Well, the one who had them was Matt, but Karen has great skills in research, which has served her well in the past, and would serve her well in the present and future. Issei, on the other hand, was enrolled in a new elementary school which shared a high school, although unfortunately for the brown-haired boy he couldn't make any friends. He didn't make them because he didn't want to, but for the simple reason that he couldn't forget what Riaz, Sona and Arena did to him. However, when winter break started, these three decided to spend it in Hell's Kitchen. It had been a somewhat difficult process because they were going to a foreign country with a child who is not even their son, but after having done a lot of paperwork and asked for some favors, Issei, Karen and Matt were able to get passports to go to the United States, being the only country where both adults were born. After several hours of travel, the three were able to arrive safely to Hell's Kitchen, renting an apartment for a few days. For the next few days, Issei enjoyed his stay in Hell's Kitchen, even though at night he could hear the sound of police sirens or ambulances, giving signs that it was not a good city at night. But leaving that aside, the brunette was able to meet Franklin Foggy Nelson, a friend of Karen and Matt, having shared a room at the Columbia Law School with the latter. However, one day Matt had an unexpected visit from an old man named Stick, being the man who was in charge of training him when he was a child, but unfortunately for him Issei was present, so Stick wanted to approach him, but Matt stopped him, telling him to go away. The old man said that he was passing by and that he wanted to say hello, but Matt didn't believe him and ended up kicking him out of his house, leaving Stick no choice, who just left, although Issei felt a little curious to know who that person was for Matt, although the vigilante asked him not to come closer and not to try to look for Stick, something that Issei promised. However, the brown-haired boy also managed to meet Frank Casalacca the Punisher, having met him on the street when Karen and he were returning to the apartment after going to the supermarket. Their meeting was by pure chance. Karen and Frank only exchanged a few words, and after that each went their own way. After several days, they returned to Tokyo because Matt and Karen had to continue with their jobs, Haya and Issei with his tuition, but one of the reasons why they chose to return to Japan was because it was better and safer there than Hell's Kitchen. And well, the years continued to pass and pass. Issei managed to learn all the martial arts that Matt taught him, and he was also able to have incomparable coordination with the spirits of light, who had great appreciation for the brown-haired boy, and vice versa. Although they were not the only ones, Issei had a great affection and appreciation for Matt and Karen, despite the fact that they were not his biological parents, he considered and treated them as if they were. He had already overcome what his biological family and friends did to him, because now he had a new family that loved him and helped him in everything. He had friends, both men and women, being the spirits, and he had a great life. He no longer wanted to have or receive anything. However, flashback. We can see how a 14-year-old Issei was sitting with a plate of cold food in front of him and on both sides. It could be seen how the brown-haired boy was worried and somewhat alarmed because he had not heard from Matt or Karen, since they always call it around 3:30 p.m. or 5 p.m. But it was 11:38 p.m., which meant that they should have arrived more than 3 hours ago and would be sleeping right now, although Issei had the feeling that something bad happened to them, causing him great concern. However, the brunette quickly got up from his seat and went to put on his blind glasses, as well as grabbing his cane, because he heard the bell ring, something that seemed strange to him, since if it had been Matt or Karen, they would have entered without the need to do that. Going to open the door, Mio had told Issei that they were 2 police officers, which took him by surprise, but he removed the lock from the door anyway and opened it, revealing 2 police officers as Mio said. "Officer 1. You must be Issei, right?" he said asked, causing him and his partner to look at the brown-haired boy with some pity. "Issei. That's right, who are you, sir?" he said asked acting dumb, something he learned over time. "Officer 2. We are policemen, boy, and we have come to." He stopped because he didn't know what to say, but he and his partner just took off their police hats, something that Issei noticed and alarmed him greatly. "Issei. Oh, why did you come? Do you have something to tell me?" he said asked with a nervous and worried tone, not wanting to believe what he was thinking. "Officer 2. Do you know Matt Murdock and Karen Page?" he said asked, to which Issei just nodded slowly. "Issei. Yes, they are my parents. Why do you ask?" he said light asked, making his suspicions become increasingly clear. "Officer 1. We're sorry kid, but Karen Page and Matt Murdock died in a car accident between 1 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. he said in a tone full of pity, while Issei was speechless. The staff he had in his hands fell and his breathing stopped, being in shock by what he heard. Issei was about to faint if it weren't because one of the officers managed to hold him while the other went in to get water. After a few minutes, Issei could barely compose himself, but he was still in shock when he heard that Matt and Karen were dead. He didn't want to believe it, he didn't want to, but he needed to know that it was really them. "Issei. See, could you take me where they are?" he said asked with a trembling and somewhat broken tone, to which both officers were going to refuse but. "Issei. Please, I beg you," he said in a pleading tone, leaving the police with no other option but to take Issei to where his parents were. Change of scene. We see how Issei was entering the morgue being accompanied by a coroner, although upon entering a putrid and horrible smell entered the brown-haired man's nostrils, causing him to be about to vomit, but he held it in. The coroner only guided Issei towards 2 bodies which were completely charred, making him notice it. "Issei. Are they really?" he said asked with a broken tone, looking at both corpses. Dr. F. Forensic Doctor, that's right, kid. I took great care in identifying them, he said with a sincere tone mixed with pity, without stopping to look at the brown-haired boy. "Issei. What or who caused the accident?" he said asked in a somewhat serious tone, without stopping to look at the corpses. Dr. F. Miss Page's car crashed into a bus, although she had the opportunity to brake, but that was the problem. Someone cut the brakes, he said in a somewhat serious tone, making Issei look at him out of the corner of his eye. "Issei. Is there anything else?" he said asked with a serious tone, realizing that the coroner had more to say. "Doctor. The real cause of their deaths was not the crash or the car fire. They were killed by a shot to the head," he said, causing the brunette to squeeze his cane tightly. "Issei. I understand," he said with a serious tone, feeling a great fury and hatred coming from the depths of his being. "Issei. Would you let me touch your faces?" he said asked in a somewhat pleading tone, to which the coroner went to grab a box of latex gloves. Dr. F. You can do it, but use these guan. He didn't finish speaking because Issei interrupted him. "Issei. Without gloves please, I would appreciate it," he said, leaving his cane aside, while the coroner said nothing and left the boy alone. With his bare hands, Issei touched the burned faces of Matt and Karen's corpses, unable to hold on a single second longer. The brown-haired boy began to cry heartbreakingly, being completely furious and wanting revenge on the people who killed his parents. End flashback. After that event, Issei contacted Foggy to take Matt and Karen's bodies to Hell's Kitchen, wanting them to be buried in their home country and in the city where they met. Something that was very, very difficult for Foggy to do, although he was able to do that, and he arranged to make the funeral arrangements for his friends himself. Because Issei was not in a good state, the brown-haired boy ended up falling into great sadness and anguish. Even the spirits of light tried to do everything they could to lift Issei's spirits, but everything they did didn't work, and the only thing the brown-haired boy asked of them was to leave him alone. Mio, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel bad and label herself as useless for not being able to help the boy who always treated her kindly and lovingly. Even the other spirits felt that way. Some time later, Matt and Karen's funeral arrived. Issei couldn't help but blame himself for their deaths, even though he didn't do anything wrong. When the funeral ended, Foggy tried to look for Issei because he was willing to take care of the brown-haired boy, as his friends would have wanted and asked him to. However, Foggy couldn't find Issei anywhere, cursing himself for getting distracted and not keeping an eye on the brunette, who walked through the streets of Hell's Kitchen, managing to feel the same fury as when he hit those boys when he was a child, but this one was much more intense and was mixed with a deep hatred. Having managed to survive a few weeks in New York, Issei, with the help of the spirits, was able to contact Frank, who upon meeting the adopted son of his deceased friends, gave him his condolences. But Issei didn't want that or to be looked at with pity, but he wanted to find the people who were involved in the murder of Matt and Karen, asking the Punisher to train him, which Frank refused, but after insistence, he ended up changing his mind. Over the course of half a year, Frank taught and told Issei everything he needed to know, from weapons handling, military strategy, torture to how to dismantle all kinds of gangs and even mafias. They put all of that into practice in the most dangerous states in the United States: New York, Detroit, Miami, California and Massachusetts, leaving a trail of corpses wherever they went. However, still not content with that, Issei applied what Frank taught him to locate Stick, Matt's teacher, being able to find a trail that led him to China, Beijing. And thanks to well-crafted false documents and a slight makeover, he was able to travel by plane to his destination. How complicated it was upon arrival, apart from the language, also how to contact Stick, something that took him weeks with the help of those as he saw them, until he decided to ask the spirits for help because he couldn't get anywhere alone. By the time he found him, the old man didn't even hesitate and agreed to help Issei by training him hard and severely for more than half a year, helping him improve his fighting technique as well as teaching him the art of stealth, as if he were a ninja. However, Stick ended up dying of natural causes, but not before leaving several scrolls to the brown-haired boy, which were nothing more than fighting styles, whether by hand or with weapons, something that Issei gladly accepted. He already had everything. He had training plans, unmatched coordination with the spirits of light and nothing else. The only thing left for Issei to do was find the people who killed Matt and Karen. After a year or even more, Issei returned to Tokyo, mainly to the house where he lived with his adoptive parents, tidying up the entire house so that the next day, he would go to school to take all the subjects he had pending and try to graduate as quickly as possible to enter the academy, which took him a few months of studying, tests and exams, and he was able to graduate with somewhat high grades and was placed in the first grade of the academy, although the first days at the academy were somewhat complicated because it started almost halfway through the first term. And as if that were not enough, at night he went out in search of the people who could be involved in the deaths of Matt and Karen, confronting and killing any criminal he found. Present. We find ourselves in a Russian restaurant in the city of Tokyo. Inside this restaurant there were several corpses of the Russian mafia. The person responsible for having done that was none other than a very tired and wounded Issei, having a black scarf covering half of his face and wearing a black sports suit. Issei himself was responsible for killing all those men with his own hands, although the brown-haired man managed to hear how someone was dragging themselves along the ground without the ability to get up because his legs had bullet wounds. Grabbing a gun that was near him, without even hesitating for a second, Issei pulled the trigger and shot the man in the head, killing him instantly. Issei. Holy shit, he exclaimed in an angry tone, since all the people he killed, plus those who knew how to speak Japanese, had not given him any kind of information about who could have killed his parents. The brown-haired boy, without wasting any time, decides to clean up the entire crime scene, cleaning up all kinds of evidence that could incriminate him, such as fingerprints, blood or some of his hair. By the time he finished doing that, the brown-haired boy left the restaurant. But after a few minutes, several police patrols surrounded the Russian restaurant, and when they entered they were surprised to see the corpses. However, while the police were doing their jobs, they were being seen and heard by Issei, who was on the terrace of a building far enough away to hear them very clearly. Chapter 1. Kuo Academy. Authors Pav. Hearing the beeping of the alarm indicating that it was 5:30 in the morning, Issei forcibly and heavily stretched his right hand to the alarm clock, pressing a button to deactivate that annoying sound. But as soon as he turned off the alarm, he settled into his bed as if he was ready to continue sleeping. However, even if he wanted to, he had no other options but to get up. So letting out a sigh and gathering up some willpower, Issei proceeded to sit up on the bed, letting out a slight wince from the pain in the process. Already sitting down, Issei brought his hand to the left side of his torso, revealing that it was wrapped in blood-stained bandages. Although that area of his body was not only injured, but also his face having small but noticeable bruises on his face. Back to what concerns us. Issei inhaled deeply to get up once and for all, approaching his closet, in which he took out a school uniform, thanks to a label written in braille, with which he could identify it. After that, he entered the bathroom with his clothes and towel included, leaving the above on top of the sink, in order to go towards the doubt by opening the hot water faucet. Although taking advantage of the fact that the water that was running was cold, with the help of some scissors, Issei was cutting the bandages that wrapped the upper part of his body. When he was finished, the bandages fell to the ground, revealing his torso covered in dried blood, as well as saturated wounds and bruises that were clearly visible despite being covered in blood. Looking at himself in the bathroom mirror, Issei was completely indifferent. He didn't seem to care about the wounds he had, his lost gaze was focused in a single direction. Although due to the steam that was generated, Issei regained his composure, and without wasting any more time he got into the bath, letting the water run down his entire body, taking with it the blood that adorned the white floor in red. After showering, getting dressed, brushing his teeth and putting on makeup to hide the bruises on his face, Issei entered the kitchen, putting the kettle with water to heat up. After that, he grabbed a remote control to turn on the television that was in the middle of the living room, and coincidentally, it was on the news channel. Dinner with Death. As you hear it, at approximately 1:25 a.m. in the evening, there was a shooting in a Russian restaurant. According to anonymous sources, the victims are members of the Bratva, the Russian mafia. A journalist recounted while standing a few meters away from the restaurant because the police had cordoned off the area. As the news continued on its course, Issei was in his room changing the sheets on his mattress because the previous one was stained with his blood. And after that, he picked up the sportswear he wore at night from the floor, being able to smell the sweat and blood impregnated on the outfit. Imada, do you have any information on what happened? Did an enemy mob attack them unexpectedly? A man asked curiously in the studio. Witnesses claimed to have seen the masked vigilante leave the restaurant. And while security cameras in the area were destroyed in accordance with his modus operandi, we have to wait for the police headquarters to confirm that he was involved and was the perpetrator of this crime, the journalist known as Yamada replied. Putting the outfit and the bloody sheet into the laundry basket, Issei could hear the kettle slowly heating up, so he decided to leave the cleaning for later. Standing, Issei was having green tea for breakfast with some slices of toast with jam while listening to the news, ending up turning off the television when he got tired of the news being about him and the crimes he committed, being sure that other more interesting things were happening in his country. After finishing breakfast and leaving the things he used in the sink, Issei proceeded to lock the windows and the back door in case someone came in, although he doubted they would break in because there were few things of monetary value. On the other hand, there were possessions loaded with such sentimental value that he couldn't afford to lose them. After doing the above, with a glass of water on the side, Issei opened a bottle of aspirin, from which he took out 2 pills, sending both into his mouth. After that, he proceeded to drink the entire glass of water. With all that ready, Issei put on a pair of sunglasses, grabbed his folding cane and his school bag, and without further ado, headed straight to Seishin High School. After a moderate trip, Issei got out of a taxi after having already paid the driver and was in front of the entrance to his school. Without wasting any more time, Issei entered the establishment heading to his classroom, which, once inside, he did not stop to greet any of the few present. Instead, he remained silent and sat at a desk located in the first row in front. Meanwhile, a student who did not lose sight of Issei approached a couple who also had their eyes fixed on their disabled companion. Boy 1. Hey, do you guys have any idea what's wrong with Murdoch? He doesn't even say hello, he questioned in a low voice, surreptitiously observing Issei. Girl. I don't know what you're surprised about, it's been like this since we started the year, she said in a whisper. Boy 2. That's right. No matter how many times you talk to him, invite him to lunch or try to keep him company, he always refuses, he commented in a low voice. Having witnessed what they were talking about, a girl who was sitting at the back of the classroom couldn't help but turn her gaze towards Issei, who was reading a chemistry book made by the school exclusively for him as it was written in braille. But the brown-haired boy, the aforementioned, had heard what his classmates were talking about without any problem, although he decided to ignore it and concentrate on memorizing the formula that he should have studied for the exam he had that same day. The reason why he studies now and didn't before is because he was constantly training, and going out at night took away many hours of study time. And although he takes a break from time to time, this time was an exception, having no other option than to study for a couple of hours and memorize everything or the most important things that could be useful to him. Minutes later, the rest of the students along with the teacher had arrived. Issei, for his part, stopped studying, confident that he had already memorized enough formulas to pass with a minimum grade, or at least, that's what he thought. Teacher. Very well. First of all, good morning, he greeted in a friendly manner, receiving a good morning from his class. Teacher. I hope you have studied for today's test, remember that to pass you need at least an 80, said, placing his briefcase on the desk. On the other hand, some students got nervous at the word exam. Without wasting any time, the teacher went on to distribute photocopies bench by bench, and in the process, he requested the notebooks and books so that no one could cheat, even Issei was not spared from it. Teacher. You have 1 hour to complete the exam, when the hour is up we will review some things. By the way, if I see who is cheating either by using their cell phones or if you pass the answers between yourselves you will fail, understood? He said somewhat sternly, to which all the students except Issei responded with an understood. Teacher. You may begin, he declared, proceeding to take a seat, and since he was free, he began to review his students' notebooks. The students, for their part, proceeded to take the exam, some knowing the answers beforehand or trying to remember them, while others were nervous because they did not know or understand anything, they only prayed to the gods for help. On the other hand, Issei remained neutral, focused on his exam, and although, thanks to his enhanced hearing, he was able to hear the babbling of those who were sure of the answers they gave. That was counterproductive, since they were incomplete babbling, and even if he wanted to copy through the noise his pencils made, he couldn't do it since he didn't understand anything about how his classmates wrote. Having no choice but to finish the exam with a little or nothing I studied. After a couple of hours of classes, which seemed to last forever, the bell for the first recess rang, making the students happy on instinct when they heard that. Teacher. You may leave. But first, take your notebooks and books, he said, pointing to his desk where everyone's supplies were. Getting up together, the vast majority of the students went to gather their belongings and put them in their briefcases. After that, they left in single file to leave the classroom. Meanwhile, being one of the last, Issei collected his things along with the same girl who was watching him before. The brown-haired boy was about to turn around until. Teacher. Issei, before you sit down. The principal told me that he wanted to talk to you about something, he said, receiving nothing more than a simple nod from Issei. The aforementioned casually left his notes on the desk. After that, he set off towards the principal's office. Meanwhile, the chemistry teacher couldn't help but sigh and stop to look at Issei's exam, which, although he didn't give it a grade for the moment, he was sure it would be an 8 almost bordering on a 7. Returning to Issei, the aforementioned was walking towards the principal's office being guided by a student from another class, both of them being in an awkward silence. The moment they arrived, the student went off to do his thing, leaving Issei to knock 3 times on the principal's door, which had been opened by a man of approximately 56 years old. Director. Issei, come on in and have a seat if you want, he said, helping Issei to enter so that he could sit down. Issei. What do you want to talk about, Director? He asked somewhat respectfully, placing his hands on top of his cane. Director. Well, I've seen your grades in elementary school, Issei, and let me tell you, I'm impressed that someone like you had such ability. But comparing them to now, it's like instead of improving, you're getting worse, he said with some disappointment in his tone, while Issei remained silent. Director. Sighing, I know you're still grieving over Matt and Karen, but this isn't what they would have wanted for you, he commented in a soft tone. For his part, Issei had his head down. Issei. What would you have wanted then? He asked somewhat dejectedly. Director. Have a good future. Karen and Matt asked me to help you get into Kuo Academy if it became co-ed, and it's a request I plan to fulfill, she answered to Issei's surprise, but that surprise turned to anger at not having good memories of her hometown. Holding back his anger by tightly gripping his staff, Issei inhaled and exhaled deeply in order to calm himself down. He was unable to forget what happened back then, and the scars on his body didn't help much. Still, she didn't want to let Matt and Karen down, she had already had enough of what she had done during the night, so swallowing all her anger, she made a decision. Issei. When will my transfer be? He asked in a somewhat serious tone, feeling a lump in his throat. Director. At most a week. First I have to do the paperwork for your transfer, until then prepare your things, and if possible, improve your grades. Although Kuo Academy does not require excellent grades, at the very least, they must be considerably high, so that you can enter with some certainty, he suggested, receiving a nod from Issei. Issei. Okay. I'm leaving, he said as he stood up. 1 week later. Getting off a moving truck, Issei stood in front of an apartment building, the same one he used to live in with Karen a long time ago, even paying in advance for the same apartment. Entering the building with the couriers carrying boxes, Issei used the elevator in order to get to the 4th floor faster. Once there, he guided the men to his residence. Once the couriers knew the way, they proceeded to load the other things, although there was not much, because Issei took most of the large furniture to a storage warehouse, since he was unable to sell it. After a few minutes, the Kotiros finished their work, to which Issei paid them the agreed amount. After that, the men left, leaving the blind teenager alone, who, breathing deeply, was greeted by the good memories he forged with Karam at that time, although, out of nowhere, he began to remember what happened with his biological family. Leo. I know it must be difficult, Issei. But at least try, she said in a soft tone, touching her protege's back in order to calm him down. Issei. I know, but what will happen if I meet them on the street? I don't know if I can stop myself from doing something to them, he expressed with some anger to the point of tightly squeezing his hand, believing that his parents and siblings continued with their lives without caring what they did to him. Leo. Then I'll keep you from meeting them, okay? He asked comfortingly, making the brown-haired boy relax. Issei. It would be for the best. Although, I doubt they'll recognize me after a long time, he said somewhat seriously, remembering that it's been 4 years since he separated from his family. Leo. Go out and breathe, better yet, let's go to the academy to confirm your transfer to the directors, she suggested, to which Issei put on his sunglasses, grabbed a sheet of paper containing photocopies, and unfolded his cane. Issei. Come on. Please tell the rest of you not to unpack anything, I'll do it when I get back, he requested, heading towards the exit. Leo. It's okay, she commented calmly, following Issei. After several minutes of travel, Issei got out of a taxi with Mio, both of them standing in front of the entrance of Kuo Academy. Without further ado, Issei proceeded to enter with Mio's help, letting himself be guided by her instructions, although to pretend his blindness and his lack of knowledge of the establishment, he stood in a hallway, and conveniently. Soft footsteps headed in his direction. Good morning, do you need help or are you looking for someone? Asked a kind voice of a girl behind Issei. The girl looked to be 17 years old, her long black hair went past her back, her hazel eyes were protected by a pair of blue framed glasses. And obviously, her clothes consisted of the female academy uniform. Issei. I'm looking for the principal's or director's office. If it's not a problem for you, can you help me? He asked, trying to appear friendly while holding the folio and his cane with his right hand. Instead, he extended his left hand towards the girl, who gave him a quick inspection. Okay, let's go, he said, approaching Issei, holding his hand. Setting off on their way, both young men walked as if nothing had happened in a somewhat calm silence. Although in a discreet manner, the girl glanced at Issei out of the corner of her eye, having noticed makeup on his right cheek. In addition, she could notice how his hand was all rough and calloused, having a certain feeling of suspicion towards the boy who had one side. Meanwhile, Issei had noticed the girl's actions, realizing his mistake in giving her his hand instead of her arm, but he didn't back down. Instead, he concentrated on maximizing his hearing in order to hear the girl's heartbeat. Finding that everything was in order, he didn't notice any hint of nervousness or anything like that. What do you bring? Issei. What's your name? Having wanted to allay any suspicions they had, they ended up interrupting each other. They were going to continue forward anyway. Issei. Sorry, you can talk, he expressed with a slight fake smile, trying to appear friendly. I wanted to know what attracted you to Kuo Academy. But I remembered that I didn't even ask your name, she said, acting embarrassed, something that Issei could barely notice. Issei. Issei Murdoch. I'd like to know yours too, in fact, that's what I was going to ask you before, he commented without losing his friendly facade. Tsubaki. It's Tsubaki Shinra, the girl introduced herself, starting to climb some stairs and helping Issei in the process. Issei. Nice to meet you, Shinra, he said falsely as he slowly climbed the stairs, although he had a slight suspicion that Tsubaki was aware that he was pretending. Tsubaki. The feeling is mutual, she commented calmly, and after a couple of seconds, they went up to the 2nd floor of the academy to continue the tour. Issei. Answering your question. What attracted me to the academy was my transfer, he declared, gaining Tsubaki's attention. Tsubaki. What academy did you go to? She asked curiously, observing the brown-haired boy. Issei. To the Seishin Institute in Tokyo, he answered without further ado. Tsubaki. I understand. We're here, she declared firmly, stopping spontaneously in front of a double door. Letting go of their hands, Issei and Tsubaki took some distance from each other, the first focusing on the door, while the other adjusted her glasses while glancing at the boy next to her. Issei. I appreciate your help, Shinra, he expressed, making a slight bow. Tsubaki. You have nothing to be thankful for, it's my job as vice president of the student council, he commented with a certain pride in his tone, and then left the place. Standing up straight, Issei was focused on Tsubaki as he had a certain feeling about her. It wasn't something bad, but it wasn't something good either. He didn't fully understand it. Still, he couldn't allow himself to let his guard down if she was present. Issei. What do you have to say, Mio? He questioned somewhat sternly, changing his focus towards the direction door. Mio? Not too much. Although maybe you're getting carried away by things from the past, she said with some doubt, leaving Issei thoughtful. Issei. It could be, he commented understandingly, as he was aware that his caution could be considered paranoia in one case or another. Returning to the initial topic, Issei decided to ignore what had happened for the moment and concentrate on his meeting with the director, being able to distinguish her thanks to the perfume she was wearing, as well as some light murmurs that gave her away. Wanting to stop wasting time, Issei proceeded to knock on the door 3 times, patiently waiting for the director to open it, which happened a few seconds later, revealing that it was a woman around 44 years old. Director? How can I help you, young man? She asked curiously, looking at the brown-haired boy from head to toe. Issei. Good morning, I'm Issei Murdoch. Director Ichikawa of Seishin High School must have informed you of my transfer, he said, handing him a sheet of paper with several papers inside. Director? Oh, yes, of course, come in, she commented, approaching Issei in order to help him enter her office. After entering and taking a seat, while waiting for the headmistress to finish reading the transfer papers, Issei was concentrating on what was happening in the academy, being able to hear nothing but vague chatter from the students. By the time the principal finished reading the papers, she focused on Issei, asking him trivial questions such as, what do you have planned for the future? What does your legal guardian do? Among other things. Issei, knowing that he had no alternative, answered, or rather, lied with certainty, something that the principal didn't notice, being satisfied by what she heard. Headmistress. Okay, that's all, young man. From now on you will go to classroom 1A. As for the books, you don't have to worry, since Director Ichikawa notified me about the transfer, I requested that they be made in Braille. But regarding the uniform, you will have to go personally to a tailor's shop to have your exact measurements taken. Here is the address, so you can go with your legal guardian, she said, handing him a card with the name of the tailor's shop and the address. Director. If they take too long to make your uniform, you can enter next week, there's no rush, she said in a friendly manner, receiving a nod from Issei, who put the card in his pants pocket. Issei. Thank you very much, Director, he expressed this time with a certain sincerity. Director. No, thanks to you. If you do well, we may be able to admit more young people with different disabilities who can achieve their dreams, she said excitedly, causing the director's words to remain in her head. Issei. Okay. I'm leaving, he said, standing up just like the director. Accompanying Issei out of the establishment, once outside, the brunette set off as he waved goodbye to the director. By the time he was a considerable distance away and the woman had entered the academy, Issei stopped in order to put his hand in his pocket where the tailor shop's card was. Issei. Let's do this quickly, he thought, not wanting to pile up his chores, being able to read the card because of the relief the letters had. With the direction of the tailor shop already in mind, Issei continued moving forward until he came across an empty taxi during the walk, which, without mincing many words, began to take him to the store. After several minutes, as soon as he arrived at the tailor shop, Issei informed the workers of the reason for his presence, to which one of the girls guided him to a changing room, taking the measurements they needed. Having been a job that lasted no more than 5 minutes, and with everything already written down, the workers informed her that they would have her uniform ready the next day. Thinking that everything was a fiasco, Issei thanked the employees for their good service and then left the store. Not having any idea what to do, Issei headed home. After a long trip and a stop at the bakery, Issei finally arrived at his apartment, entering his home at the same time that he had a croissant in his mouth and Mio was floating next to him. Mio? Don't you think you should eat healthier things? She asked somewhat scoldingly while Issei finished eating the puff pastry from her mouth. Issei. My stomach is tired of so many sandwiches and fruit, he answered, leaving his glasses, his cane, and a bag with more croissants on the living room table. I like that, kid. Cheer up your stomach because you won't know if you'll be able to make it the next day, a male voice commented, forming a dark figure in the middle of the room. Leo. Ryu, she called sternly, focusing her attention on the figure. Issei. Who is it, Mio? He questioned with an alarmed tone, being able to perceive and even see this Ryu. Leo. His name is Ryu. He's an evil spirit, dark or wandering, either way, it doesn't change the fact that he's trash, she expressed with some annoyance to the surprise of Issei, who never knew that side of Mio until now. Ryu. You hurt my feelings, Mio. Did you forget the good times we spent together? He questioned with feigned pity and leaning back dramatically. Mio. I doubt you care about such moments, you have always cared about yourself, and only yourself, she stated sternly, while Issei was nothing more than a spectator. Ryu. Why do you think I'm dead, doll? He asked sarcastically, bothering Mio. Mio. Just don't cause more problems than there already are, he requested seriously. Ryu. Oh come on, you say that like it's going to cause a war or something. Relax, I'm not going to make your child get hurt any more than he already is, Ryu commented in a funny way, approaching Issei and pressing his cheeks. Issei. Was it always like this? He asked, bewildered while looking at Mio. Mio. Unfortunately, yes. Nothing and no one can control him, he only controls himself, she answered somewhat seriously, while Ryu flew around Issei. Ryu. You know something, kid? You have my full attention. Anything you need, you can ask, my team and I are at your service, he said helpfully as other dark figures appeared. Issei. Thanks, I guess, he commented with some distrust. Ryu. Alright, what do we do now? He questioned somewhat anxiously. Issei. The weekend is near, and the director said that there was no problem with me entering next Monday, he commented calmly, leaving his glasses and his cane on a table. Mio. Don't you think you're being too hasty? She asked somewhat seriously, being aware of what Issei wanted to do. Issei. I still have to recover from some injuries, anyway, I'm just going out to gather information and get to know the city, he answered, leaving Mio speechless. Ryu. You have my support. Besides, if we're going to be partners, we should get to know each other, he said in a friendly manner, leaning against Issei, which Mio didn't like. Ryu. Don't worry, I won't steal it from you, I'm just trying to cooperate for the cause, Ryu joked, further annoying Mio. Somewhat curious, Issei wanted to know why both spirits had a bad relationship, although if Mio didn't attack him and only complained while Ryu had fun bothering her, maybe their relationship wasn't as bad as he thought, deciding to put it aside for the moment. 5 days later. We can see how students from Kuo Academy were standing in front of the establishment after a short weekend, some were half asleep, others did not want to be there, but were forced to, while a small portion were excited for the school day to begin. And as the minutes passed, boys and girls arrived either on foot or in luxury cars, although one of these cars stood out, being a taxi. Capturing the attention of the students present, mainly the girls who, among murmurs, made fun of the one or the other inside the vehicle. From which, the back door opened and the first thing that was revealed was the tip of a cane. After that, a boy got out of the taxi, it was Issei. Who was wearing the Kuo Academy uniform, even wearing a coat, and although it was a little cold, he was wearing it more to hide the scars on his arms. The students present were perplexed by this and did not expect, and were not even informed, that there would be a disabled student at the academy. This escalated so much that it even began to spread that the new kid was some kind of gifted person, that despite his lack of vision, it did not affect his studies. Hearing that, Issei had to hold back his laughter as he didn't expect silly rumors to start spreading about him so quickly. He didn't even consider himself gifted, he was just an idiot who sooner or later, they were going to end up finding him dead in some warehouse or dark alley. The entrance bell rang, causing all the students to turn their attention back to the academy, although at the same time as they entered, many saw how the first and, until now, disabled person in the establishment was accompanied by a second-grade boy who agreed to take him to the classroom where he was assigned. After a few minutes of walking, Issei ended up in front of the entrance to his assigned classroom, while the student who helped him proceeded to leave, since he also had classes to attend, but not before receiving a thank you from Issei. The moment the upperclassmen left, Issei focused on his classroom, proceeding to enter it, receiving the gazes of the students and the teacher present. Issei. Good morning, he said respectfully, bowing slightly as a greeting. Professor. Oh, you must be the transfer student. Issei Murdoch, am I wrong? He asked somewhat curiously, receiving nothing more than a nod from the brown-haired boy. Issei. Not at all, he answered with a certain neutrality, while the teacher quickly inspected the classroom. Teacher. The rest of your classmates haven't arrived, if you want we can leave the introductions for another time, he offered, not thinking it was appropriate for the new student to introduce himself to the 4 students present. Issei. It's okay, he expressed indifferently, beginning to walk towards the first row of desks in order to save time and trouble. Placing his briefcase on top of the desk, Issei opened it to take out the books written in Braille that the academy prepared for him. Although in the middle of the process, someone, more specifically, a girl of the same age as Issei, positioned herself next to him. The girl had long brown hair tied in 2 pigtails, her eyes had a beautiful green color that radiated a certain gentleness. Her clothing consisted of the female academy uniform, with a pair of long stockings up to her thighs. Haruko. Nice to meet you, my name is Haruko Nomura, I am the class representative. If you need anything or have a problem you can come to me, she said with some enthusiasm. Issei. I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, he expressed with a slight fake smile, which Haruko didn't notice. Even so, the class representative smiled back at Issei with all the good intentions possible. After that, the girl turned around and after the first few hours of class, Issei got up from his seat with his cane already deployed, but before he could walk, Haruko stood next to him. "Haruko? Do you want me to give you some directions, Murdoch?" she asked in a friendly manner being observed by the aforementioned. Issei. "The cafeteria and the bathroom if possible, please," he requested trying to appear friendly by opening his elbow. Haruko. "Okay, let's go," she said calmly, linking her arm with Issei's so they could both leave the room. "Haruko. What academy are you from, Murdoch?" she asked curiously, watching her new classmate out of the corner of her eye. Issei. "From Seishin High School, Tokyo. It was a completely unexpected transfer," he replied calmly. Haruko. "It must have been a long trip," she said somewhat surprised. Issei. "You can't even imagine it," he commented sarcastically, being looked at by a totally disoriented Haruko, smiling with amusement at that. Haruko. "Gosh, at least wait until tomorrow," she expressed somewhat embarrassed by her stupid previous comment. Issei. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help but take advantage of the opportunity," he said sadly, but still keeping his smile. Haruko. "Heavens," she expressed with a pout, suspecting that Issei was going to make fun of her every chance he gets. Although the rest of the walk was calm, Haruko pointed out to Issei where the men's bathroom was and for his reference, they counted room by room until they reached the bathrooms. Following that, they continued their tour, this time, towards the academy cafeteria. By the time they entered the place, both of them used the same interior tactic so that Issei would have an idea of where the cafeteria was. Haruko. "And here the tour ends," she expressed somewhat enthusiastically, not even caring about the chatter going on in the cafeteria. Issei. "Thank you, Nomura," he said while bowing. Haruko. "You have nothing to be thankful for, Murdoch," she commented modestly, even shaking her hands. Issei. "Still, thank you," he commented insistently, standing up straight, and just as Haruko was about to speak, someone interrupted her. "Haruko, President Sauna is calling for you," a girl warned. Despite that, due to her face she looked like a boy and her prominent height didn't help much, her blue hair reached her shoulders and the color of her eyes matched her hair. And like all the girls at the academy, she wore the female uniform. Haruko. "Sigh, okay, I'll be right there," she said somewhat disappointed, turning her attention to Issei. Haruko. "I'm sorry. I'd like to join you for lunch, but duty calls," she said sadly, putting her hands together in a sign of apology. Issei. "Go," he commented calmly and giving a smile to Haruko, who proceeded to head off with the other girl. For his part, Issei set off, guiding himself with his cane, towards the cafeteria counter, although floating next to him was Ryu, who was most comfortable in the place. Once in front of the counter, Issei asked about the menu, having many options, but the most common were rice with curry, miso super udon. Issei. "Curry rice and a bottle of orange juice, please," he requested politely, to which the staff proceeded to carry out his order. Ryu. "I guess I don't need to say it," he commented, focusing his attention on Issei who was calmly waiting for his food. Issei. "Yes, that Sauna is who I think she is, my suspicions that Shinra, Haruko and that girl are demons are high," he stated sternly, after recognizing the light but noticeable smell of Shinra's perfume on Haruko and the girl who was looking for her. Ryu. "And you're not wrong, your partner and that tomboy are demons. But to be exact there are 15 demons, counting those two, plus that Shinra," he declared with confidence in his words, while Issei put on a blank expression. Issei. "It seems that Mio was serious about making him avoid them," he commented while a sound in front of him made him return to the real world. "Cook. Your order is ready, young man. Would you like me to take it for you?" she asked in a friendly manner. Issei. "Would you do me a favor?" he replied with a slight smile, to which the cook turned around in order to carry the tray. Issei. "Leave it on the nearest table, I don't want to take up too much of your time," he said in a calm tone, to which the cook followed his request. "Cook. There it is," the cook commented once she left the tray on a table. Issei. "Thank you very much, you can keep the change," he expressed in a kind way, handing over almost double the money of what the lunch cost, surprising the cook who did not expect such a gesture, thinking that Issei made a mistake, but the aforementioned calmly sat down to eat. Cook. "Thank you very much, bon appetit," she said honestly, and then returned to her work somewhat happy. Ryu. "So you're not as bad as I thought," he commented somewhat disappointed while flying around Issei. Issei. "Sometimes I have to pretend to be a good person. Besides, money is no problem, I have plenty after stealing it from drug dealers for almost a year," he commented nonchalantly while eating his lunch, not having any problem using what could be called dirty money, since he believed that money was neither good nor bad, only the one who uses it. Ryu. "Wow. You're acting calmer than I expected," he commented surprised while watching as Issei calmly ate his lunch. Issei. "Do I really look like that?" He questioned seriously, to which paying more attention, Ryu realized that Issei was holding the fork and knife so tightly that his veins swelled. Issei. The good thing is that none of them are present, otherwise it would have exploded. And although Shinra and Raruko have nothing to do with it, knowing that they are demons reminds me that Gremory and Citri were to blame for having introduced us to the supernatural, he said completely angry, grabbing the bottle of orange juice to open it. Ryu. That can easily be solved, you just have to send me, and before they know it, they'll be dead. Same with your family, he suggested convincingly while Issei stopped drinking the juice. Issei. No. If I remember correctly, both belong to a noble family, and while I don't doubt that you can do a clean job, the chances of them finding a connection between you and me will immediately send them to kill me. And if someone is going to kill me, I prefer to do it myself, Issei stated seriously while Ryu positioned himself in front of him. Ryu. What about your family? As far as I know they threw you away like trash, he commented curiously, leaving Issei silent for a moment. Issei. As long as they don't get in the way of my life, I won't say anything to them or do anything to them. Although if I have the chance, I'll try to make them feel like shit until they wish for death, he declared with a certain cynicism, something that pleased Ryu. Ryu. Okay, changing the subject, kid. When you get home, Mio and I have something to tell you. For now, relax. See you, he said, relaxed, and left the cafeteria through a wall as if nothing had happened. After a few long hours of classes and having bought his groceries in a store that was somewhat close to his apartment, we now see how Issei was sitting with Mio and Ryu in front of him. Issei. Very well. What do you want to talk about? He asked somewhat curiously, crossing his arms and observing both spirits. Mio. Well, we wanted to tell you that the spirit could not continue speaking when she was interrupted by Ryu. Ryu. You don't have enough to win, let alone fight a demon, he declared bluntly, annoying Mio, while Issei understood where this whole matter was going. Issei. Hey, I know I need a couple of brain cells, but I'm aware that if I fight a demon face to face I'm just digging my own grave, he said in a neutral tone. Ryu. But what would you say if I told you that there is a way that you can fight face to face and have a small chance of coming out alive, and maybe as the victor? He asked suggestively, getting Issei's attention. Issei. What is it about? I returned the question, leaning forward with interest. Mio. We can make you able to use magic. Although we can only teach you the basics, the rest will be up to you, she answered uneasily, something very unlike her, but on the other hand, Issei seemed to ponder his options until he decided. Issei. What should be done? He asked curiously, after all, magic could save him on more than one occasion. Ryu. Not too much. Just lie down and leave everything in our hands, right, Mio? He said, focusing on the aforementioned, something that Issei also did. Mio. Yes, she answered, still uneasy, disconcerting Issei. Ryu. Perfect. Let the test begin, he declared somewhat excitedly. Issei. Hey, don't he couldn't finish his line as he fell unconscious on the couch the moment Ryu touched him. After several hours, Issei slowly regained consciousness, feeling so disoriented that it was difficult for him to sit up. Issei. What happened to me? He questioned, completely dejected, as if the energy he had been taken away from him. Ryu. Don't worry, it's a secondary affection. You'll be fine by tomorrow, he answered carefree, having appeared in the room with Mio, who positioned herself next to Issei to comfort him. Issei. Why didn't they tell me and do it on the weekend? He questioned, annoyed, Saturday or Sunday having been better so he could sleep all day without worrying about classes the next day like now. Ryu. Leaving aside the fact that it would take away the fun of seeing you wake up late tomorrow to go to school. There also needed to be a unanimous agreement between Mio and I, he answered calmly, receiving a sharp look from her. Issei. Was that decision between the two of them really that important? He asked sternly, looking at both Ryu and Mio equally. Mio. It was my fault. Well, magic can help you with your night outings, when it comes to fighting a supernatural being you would have disadvantages. You can hurt them and even kill them, yes. But most of the cases involve beings that have existed for centuries, there are even others that have existed for millennia. What we have given you is a card that you can use to escape, she answered somewhat severely, while Issei did not say anything until seconds later. Issei. Don't worry, unless it's necessary. I won't meddle in any supernatural matters, he stated firmly in his tone. After all, he had only one goal in life, and that was to find Matt and Karen's killer. Chapter 2. Battle Against the Fallen. Author narrates. Located in Toshiman Park, Tokyo, to be more exact in the area open to nature, there were some couples and families having fun together. Although, we are going to focus on a 14-year-old Issei accompanied by Matt and Karen, who had prepared everything including a tablecloth on the grass to make it look like they were on a picnic. Matt. If it weren't for me, Mr. Nelson would be a butcher, he commented with a smile while lying on the floor. Karen. I never tire of hearing that story. Although, Foggy is a better lawyer than a butcher, she said with confidence in her words. Matt. Yes, you're right, he expressed in a melancholic way until he noticed something strange about Issei. Matt. Issei, are you okay? He asked a little worried, noticing how the brown-haired boy's heart rate was increasing. Issei. Yeah, I am. It's okay, he replied somewhat nervously, proceeding to breathe and exhale deeply in order to calm down. Karen. Are you sure? You don't seem to be doing very well, so to speak, she commented distrustfully, observing the brown-haired boy closely. Issei. Sure, in fact, I'm looking forward to going to all the games like we planned, he said somewhat excitedly to the bewilderment of his foster parents. Matt. What happened to you? Didn't you say you were too big to go to an amusement park, he questioned with a slight mocking smile. Issei. Yes, but then I thought that when I'm older it won't be the same as now, so I want to take advantage of it, he answered somewhat animatedly to the surprise of both adults, but with a smile on her face, Karen began to gather and put things away in the basket they brought. Karen. If you say it like that, there will be no other way, she commented, somewhat happy about the sudden change her adopted son had undergone. Being helped by both blind men, they still pretended a little so as not to attract attention. Once everything was packed, they proceeded to head towards the main park of Tashiman. Upon arriving, without wasting time, the three proceeded to go to the closest attractions they had, from a carousel to a roller coaster. They were having a great time, laughter of pure joy, their hearts were racing as they went from here to there, even so, they were happy, especially Issei was having fun like never before. However, in an instant, everything stopped, the laughter, the sound of the rides, the food stalls cooking, the people in the park. Everything was empty and in absolute silence, which baffled Issei as he stood in the middle of the park, turning around in search of someone, but not sensing anyone or anything. Of course that made him desperate, especially when he couldn't find Matt and Karen, so he started running around the park in search, trying to find some clue like their smell or their heartbeat, but nothing. Until he was able to hear some muffled sounds near where he was, so running as fast as possible. Upon arriving, Issei noticed how Matt and Karen were tied up and gagged on the carousel, to be more specific on the horses. Issei. Mio Ryu, I need your help, he exclaimed startled, but neither of the two spirits appeared to help him. Instead, Issei could hear footsteps approaching his position, which completely threw him off balance. However, getting up he realized that there were 10 people, all of whom were carrying high-caliber weapons. Stop, ordered in a commanding voice the one who seemed to be the boss, to which the rest of those involved stopped and turned to Matt and Karen, completely confusing Issei. Aim, ordered the same voice as before, to which the men raised their rifles and pointed in the direction of Matt and Karen. Issei. Hey, wait, he shouted worriedly, trying to go towards the men, but when he wanted to take a step, he felt as if something was imprisoning him. At that, Issei became even more desperate, trying to move, but for some reason someone or something invisible was holding him back. Meanwhile, the men took off the safeties on their weapons to Issei's fear. Issei. Wait, please wait, he repeated, completely desperately watching the men who seemed to ignore them. Instead, little by little, they pressed the trigger of their weapons. Issei. Just wait, he pleaded desperately until several shots began to be heard. Waking up abruptly, Issei jumped out of bed all sweaty and with labored breathing, turning his head in different directions as he was not aware of where he was. After a few seconds, he was able to return to the real world and calm down a little, swallowing hard after the dream. Although when he regained consciousness, Issei felt that the stitches on his wounds had opened. Heading towards the bathroom, Issei entered with a first aid kit without even bothering to turn on the light. The first thing he did was remove the bloody bandages that were wrapped around his torso with the help of a pair of scissors. Leo. Nightmare, right? She asked while standing at the bathroom door, being watched by Issei. Issei. You said it yourself, he commented, not being in a very good mood, to which Mio only approached. Leo. What was it about? She asked curiously, opening the first aid kit. Issei. We were at the amusement park, we were having a good time, until everything changed. Matt and Karen were tied to the carousel, and some guys with guns appeared and shot them. I couldn't do anything, no matter how hard I tried to do something. It's the same old story, he answered somewhat dejectedly with his head down. Leo. You know that's not real, he commented, wetting gauze with alcohol. Issei. Yes, I know, but I can't help it that it was some powerful mobster who sent them to kill them, he commented with a lost look, remembering that Matt and Karen, being lawyers, mainly Matt, must have had powerful enemies who wanted them dead. Leo. Try not to think about it. You'll just repeat the same scene over and over again. Instead of thinking about who your enemies might have been, think about what they did for you and remember what they went through, he advised comfortingly, gently caressing his protege's back. Issei. Thank you, Mio, he expressed with a light smile. After all, she was the only being that stayed with him for a long time, and she was the only one who knew him well, without leaving aside the other luminous spirits. Being on the terrace of the Kuo Academy, Issei was sitting on a bench listening to the different conversations of the students. A month had passed since his transfer, during which time he had done nothing but strengthen his body, his senses and his magical ability. Not only fulfilling the quota of exercises and rest, but he also went out at night facing both criminals and creatures that called themselves renegade demons. And while the latter could help him apply what he practiced, the almost non-existence of these creatures in the city forced him to have to face gangs, although he didn't have any other options. Speaking of the latter, Issei realized that in his hometown, like Tokyo, crime was present, perhaps not as much as in the capital, but there were a good number of drug dealers, laboratories and big fish that he could not ignore. Much less if it even reached his school, having discovered more than one student carrying all kinds of drugs. For that reason he has been on the roof listening to the students' conversations, so that when he gets the name of the dealer and where he could find him, he would pay him a visit at night. However, his focus was interrupted by two powerful presences that possessed a pure aura, which, although it caught his attention, he decided to ignore it as it was none of his business, being sure that Sonar Rias would take care of that matter. But before he could relax, Issei felt another presence, this time, one approaching in his direction causing him to let out a tired sigh. At the same time, the door to the terrace opened revealing a cute girl who appeared to be 16 years old. Despite that, she lacked height, her back-length hair was a golden blonde color, and her eyes were emerald green transmitting innocence and kindness. It was to be expected that he would be here, the girl commented, heading towards Issei. Issei. What brings you here, Asia? He asked in a monotonous manner while the girl known as Asia stood in front of him, holding out a bag containing a lunch. Asia. How are you not going to the cafeteria? I came here to have lunch with you, she said with a smile taking a seat next to Issei. Issei. No need, I'm not hungry, he expressed indifferently as Asia opened her lunch, revealing 4 pieces of sandwiches. Asia. You don't have to be so mean to me, at least try the sandwich I made, she commented with a pout, handing a sandwich to the brown-haired boy. Issei. Don't you have someone else to bother, Asia? He asked without mincing his words. Asia. Well yes, I do. But I can't be with them knowing that you're alone here, she replied with a friendly smile. Issei. What need is there? He asked, bewildered, not understanding Asia's thoughts. Asia. You'll have to grab a sandwich for me to answer that, she commented, to which Issei thought for a few seconds. Issei. Over. If I grab a sandwich, will you stop talking? He asked in a slightly serious tone. Asia. I don't promise anything, she said calmly as Issei grabbed the sandwich that Asia had extended to him. Issei. Thank you, he said, lifting the sandwich to take a bite. Asia. Bon appetit, she said in a friendly tone, proceeding to eat as well. Issei. This is good, he commented with some sincerity in his tone, having believed that it was a sandwich bought at some bakery or supermarket, but it was handmade when he noticed that the ingredients were fresh. Asia. I'm glad to hear that. Although I made them in a hurry because I got up late, she said, a little embarrassed not by the compliment, but by her little anecdote, although she did not receive any comment from Issei. With a blank expression, Asia expected some mocking or sarcastic comment from Issei, who, although he was very neutral most of the time, there were few days when they talked calmly as if nothing was wrong, believing that his friend had bipolar problems or some kind of identity dissociation. Being sure that he would have plenty of friends to hang out with if he stopped having that neutral and somewhat grumpy attitude that made the rest of the students not want to get close to him unless he needed help with something due to his disability. Even the representative of her class, Haruko Nomura, did not get closer to Issei after her 4th day at Kuo Academy, having been shocked and bewildered by the drastic change her classmate had, being completely different from when she met him on the first day. Asia. Issei, why don't you make friends? She asked unconsciously, having that matter running through her head, so much so that it ended up escaping. Issei. Sigh, I'm not here to make friends or be liked by everyone, Asia, he answered neutrally, while halfway through finishing his sandwich. Asia. But don't you feel lonely? What does your family think about that? She asked curiously, tilting her head to the side to observe the brunette. At that question, Issei didn't know what to answer, instead, he didn't hear anything, even when Asia spoke to him he only heard her fuzzy voice. Unable to help himself, he began to remember what happened on his birthday a year ago, feeling an enormous melancholy when he heard the voices and laughter of Matt and Karen. Asia. Issei, are you okay? She asked a little worried, making Issei return to the real world upon hearing her. Issei. Thanks for the sandwich, Asia. You're very kind and I appreciate it, but I'm not looking for a friend, he said, proceeding to get up from the bench, while Asia didn't know what to say to that. Issei. Don't hang out with me anymore and don't talk to me either, he finished saying and then headed towards the terrace exit, leaving Asia somewhat dejected. While Asia struck a chord with Issei, what didn't help her either was that she was a demon, something that Issei couldn't help being able to sense her dark presence. She wasn't a bad girl, just like Haruko, but her resentment made them reject her as potential friends, much less if she planned to remain a vigilante in the long term. Deciding to leave that aside, Issei focused more on going down the stairs to go to his classroom until he stopped walking when he heard two different voices at the bottom of the stairs. "Tell me, do you accept the job?" asked a boy who appeared to be in his third year, lying on a fence by the stairs. "Yes, I accept. When and what time is it?" asked a somewhat anxious second-year boy, to which the older boy approached him. "It will be in," the rest was told to the second-year boy in the ear. Even so, Issei was able to hear and memorize the place and time the meeting would be. The bell for the end of recess rang throughout the academy. At that, the students that Issei had in his sights did not waste time and left the place taking different paths. But going down a couple of steps, Issei didn't lose track of either of them, trying to remember the scent they had to identify them and thus teach them a lesson for having chosen that type of work. At night, Issei found himself running on the rooftop of a building, wearing his trusty black outfit for his nights out. Getting back to the matter at hand, Issei slowly stopped walking, realizing that he was several blocks away from where the altercation occurred. The good part, everything went well, the drug dealers ended up dead, and the students involved received a good beating that would make them reconsider. The bad part is that he was tired and hurt, so much so that he couldn't take it anymore and decided to sit on the edge of the apartment building where he was located. Once seated, Issei made sure that there was no one around him near or far that could compromise his identity. Realizing that there was no one, he removed the scarf from his face, revealing his messy hair, his face covered in sweat and bruises around his eyes and cheeks. His chest and arms had cuts caused by knives or grazes from bullets. He even had a bullet embedded in his left arm. However, feeling a little dizzy, Issei tried to get up, but in doing so, he stumbled slightly and began to fall off the terrace, something that not even the spirits themselves could prevent. Luckily for him, Issei ended up on top of a garbage container, and although the garbage bag softened the fall, the pain he felt increased more. And since fatigue didn't help, Issei slowly closed his eyes without caring who found him unconscious. Minutes passed and passed, until turning around to enter the alley, a man who was around 89 years old was holding a garbage bag. When he was in front of the container, he was surprised to find a masked person on top of all the garbage. The next day, inside an apartment, more specifically in the main room, was an Issei lying on the couch. Starting to show signs of waking up, by the time he was conscious, Issei slowly sat up on the couch, being completely bewildered by his surroundings. "Wow, you woke up, boy," said the surprised voice of a man behind Issei. "Issei. Who are you?" he said, seriously directing his sight towards that man. "Stan. My name is Stanley Martin Lieber, but if you want you can call me Stan," said the renowned Stan Lee, who only sat on a sofa in front of Issei to leave a cup of coffee on a small table in the middle of the room. "Stan. The coffee will relieve your headache a little," he said as he took a sip of the contents of his cup. "Issei. Issei, just call me Issei and thank you for the coffee, Mr. Stan," he said, grateful for the coffee and starting to take a sip. "Stan. By the way, Issei, what were you doing in the garbage container all bleeding and injured last night?" he said, curiously looking at the brunette. Issei didn't know what to say. He practically didn't know how to answer that question. The place was left in a somewhat uncomfortable silence. "But Stan. It doesn't matter, you don't have to answer that," he said, somewhat carefree to Issei's surprise. "Issei. Perhaps don't you want to know the reason?" he said, with some surprise. "Stan. Because I would have, you haven't done anything to me and besides, you seem to be a good boy, well leaving aside the blood and wounds you had," he said, still with his carefree tone, while Issei was surprised by that. He did not consider himself a good person, even though he knew that he had done practically unforgivable things in his life. "Issei. But why don't I call the police or an ambulance?" he said, curiously and somewhat seriously. "Leo. I asked him not to do it," he said, appearing in the middle of the room. "Stan. The lady is telling the truth. At first I was hesitant, but when she told me what you were doing, I decided not to do it," he said with a small smile, although that had surprised Issei. "Stan. A neighbor of mine is a nurse. She was the one who took care of your wounds and the bullet you had in your arm," he said, while taking a sip of his drink. "Issei. I still don't understand why he helped me or at least called the police," he said, something serious. "Stan. I'll be honest with you, Issei, I know that this world is full of bad people and that innocent people die because of them. That's why my neighbor and I didn't call the police," he said in a somewhat serious tone, although Issei didn't understand very well. "Issei. What do you mean by that?" he said, confused. "Stan. I think you are a hero, Issei, even if you don't believe it, that's what you are, and this world needs heroes, the good ones clearly, who do things without asking for anything in return," he said, still with his serious tone, while Issei didn't say anything. "Issei. I may be everything Stan, but a hero is the least I am or will become, he said seriously as he stood up from the couch he was on with willpower. Issei. Do you know where my sweatshirt is? He said asked towards the old man. Stan. I'll be right back, he said, getting up and leaving his cup on the table, then leaving the room. Issei waited patiently for Stan until he heard the old man return to just say. Stan. I took the trouble to sew it and wash it, it's still a little wet, but here you go, he said, giving the sweatshirt to Issei. Issei. Thank you, he said, grabbing the sweatshirt and putting it on, although when Issei finished putting on the sweatshirt, Stan seemed to have given him a small paper. Issei. What is this? He said asked surprised when he felt the paper in his hands. Stan. It's the address of a rehabilitation center. I help alcoholics, drug addicts and even retired soldiers from the war. I know this has nothing to do with you, but you can go to release some of the pain you have inside you, and maybe we can help you to be happy, he said as he remembered how Issei had a nightmare that was not good at all that night. Issei. HMPH happiness is an imminent kick in the balls, he said seriously while putting the paper in his pants pocket. Stan. What? Do you hit your own balls? He said asked with a smile while that caused Issei to laugh a little. Issei. I'm leaving Stan, thanks for the coffee, the lodging and also thank your neighbor for me, he said with a grateful tone while he was ready to leave, but he didn't know where the door was to do so. Stan. Go down the right hallway, count about 8 steps, then go down the left hallway and continue straight, there is the door, he said, telling him where the door was so that Issei just nodded. Stan. But before you go, do me a favor, Issei, he said before the brown-haired boy took a step. Stan. Look at yourself in the mirror and look into your eyes too, that's all I ask, he said in a somewhat pleading tone, something that Issei missed, but he ignored it and decided to leave Stan's apartment. 5 days later. We can see how Issei was on the terrace of the building where he lived, looking for signs of help from people who were going to be assaulted or something like that. Instead, he only heard the sound of cars passing by, or what his neighbors or other people who lived in a different apartment a couple of blocks away were doing. Ryu. Are you tall, boy? He asked curiously flying next to an Issei sitting on the edge of the terrace. Issei. No, nothing, he answered somewhat calmly, acknowledging that the crime rate in his city did not compare to Tokyo. Ryu. Well, I hope you don't fall, he said mockingly. Issei. I'll try not to do it, he commented relaxed, to which Ryu remained silent. The minutes passed and passed, causing Issei to reach a point where he got bored, planning to return to his home to go to sleep. Until he stopped abruptly and then turned in a specific direction, focusing all his attention on that place. Issei. Ryu, Kuo Academy is in that direction, right? He questioned to confirm the doubt he had. Ryu. Yes, from what I could see, there is a barrier surrounding your school. Something serious must be going on, boy, he commented, focusing his attention on Issei. Issei. I'll go investigate what's going on, he declared, beginning to distance himself from the edge of the terrace in order to jump to the other one in front of him. Leo. Don't you have to go, Issei? If there is a barrier, it means that Riaz or Sona must be in charge of what is happening, she said somewhat worried while Issei turned his attention to Ryu, who seemed to be talking to a spirit of darkness. Issei. What's wrong, Ryu? He asked curiously, not having been able to hear what they were talking about, completely ignoring Mio. Ryu. It seems that the devil girls are fighting with some bigwigs from the enemy factions. And it seems that that barrier was there quite a while ago, he informed, making Issei put on a serious face. Issei. Then something must be going on there and it can't be good. But if so, I won't be able to do it alone, I'll need your help, he said, watching Mio for a few seconds and then diverting her to Ryu. Both. You can count on that, they said with a smile, while Issei just nodded and headed towards the academy. After several minutes, Issei arrived at the academy, obtaining the help of a pair of light spirits who managed to make a small gap in the magic barrier, enough for him to pass without problems. However, by the time she entered, in the sky with a pair of bat wings spread out, Haruko, who was helping to maintain the barrier, could see a masked person entering the battlefield. Returning to Issei, the aforementioned was following Mio's instructions in order to save time, and by the time he was close, he could sense a ton of presences, both negative and positive. Although putting aside the rest, Issei could sense that one of those presences far outweighed the others. Issei. What are these beings? He questioned, somewhat alarmed, recognizing the demons, but not the others. Leo. They are fallen angels. Like demons, they are treacherous, so don't be careless, she warned somewhat severely while Issei nodded. Issei. Okay. Are you with me? He asked without stopping his advance. Leo. Ryu. Of course, obviously yes, both spirits declared. Arriving at the battlefield, Issei could hear chaos in the area, explosions and the sound of metal clashing. If it were because he was used to this type of situation, right now, Issei would have been on the ground overwhelmed by the loud, unbearable and repetitive sounds. Getting back to the matter at hand, Issei realized how the demons were being defeated by the fallen angels. Even so, they did not stop fighting, although in the long term, they would end up losing without a doubt. Something he couldn't allow, since although he had a resentment towards the demons, especially Rias and Sona, he was aware that both heiresses eliminated the renegades that appear in the city. After all, they did a greater good than him. So having no other choice, Issei mindlessly charged towards a fallen angel on the ground, catching the attention of his target, along with others who were shocked by the appearance of a new individual. Fallen angel. Die, you idiot, he said haughtily, creating a spear of light to try to throw it. However, for some reason he couldn't do it. Of course that alarmed the dark winged being, who moved his hand several times so that his creation would follow his command, but nothing. It was as if he was ignoring him. Speechless, the fallen angel had no idea what was happening until suddenly he felt a presence behind him. Ignoring it, he found himself face to face with a masked man who, without wanting to hesitate for a second, cut his neck with an ice dagger. With an expression of absolute surprise, the fallen angel fell to his knees on the ground, aware of his final moments. He raised his head, observing the figure that coldly took his life, and thus fell face down to the ground while his blood dyed the earth red. But Issei, he kept his attention on the fallen angel he killed, noticing how his heartbeat was slowly decreasing. However, Issei was forced to duck, letting another fallen angel with a sword in hand pass by having failed to cut him. Stopping his flight a few meters from the ground, the fallen angel turned around to attack the masked man. However, in doing so, the being who had lost the grace of God could see something small heading straight towards him, but especially towards his left eye. Before he knew what it was, an ice knife pierced his eye, feeling such pain that he couldn't help but let out a scream. Although, due to the presence of a certain being, he was forced to close his mouth and contain the pain inside. After that, the fallen angel brought one of his hands to his face to remove the dagger. However, before he could do that, he saw Issei running in his direction, feeling some suspicion, which was replaced by anger because of the wound in his eye. Without wasting time, the fallen angel lunged at Issei, who did not stop for anything in the world, even when the dark-winged being prepared his sword ready to cut him in half. By the time they were both close, Issei made a jump that the fallen angel decided to take advantage of. After all, there was no way he could dodge his attack in the middle of the sky. However, the fallen angel was completely absorbed in witnessing how Issei had touched the empty air in order to take another leap, enough so that he could easily dodge his attack. The dark-winged being was stupefied. Even though he had one eye, he was completely sure that there was nothing and no one that could serve as a surface for the subject in front of him to jump into the air. For his part, Issei turned around in the air to stretch out his arms and grab the fallen angel's neck before he passed by, surprising the supernatural being as he had not expected that. Although what alarmed the dark-winged being the most was feeling how the masked man was strangling him with one arm, with the other he seemed to be holding the knife in his eye, causing him to feel an ugly pain in that area. Starting to fly with some abruptness, the fallen angel tried to get rid of Issei, which didn't work until he changed the normal grip of his sword to a rear one, ready to cut off the masked man's arm. While that could work, Issei prevented it by removing the ice knife from the fallen man's eye, who felt terrible pain. To top it off, that was not enough, beginning to feel the masked man repeatedly stabbing him in his left side. But before he could adjust to the pain, Issei proceeded to thrust a dagger deeply into the fallen angel's left ear, whose only eye went white, beginning to descend until it fell to the ground. However, Issei, by using the body of the black-winged being to mitigate the fall, did not expect that when he hit the ground, the sword of light that the fallen angel held throughout this time would end up sticking into his right leg. Once on the ground, Issei proceeded to remove the sword from his leg, letting out a slight grimace accompanied by a muffled moan. But that ready, Issei proceeded to take advantage of the opportunity to face the other fallen, throwing spells that he learned by himself, which, although they were not very powerful, did not mean that they were weak. Faced with the sudden attacks, some were fallen angels who managed to protect themselves in time, others unfortunately received them head-on, receiving severe injuries. Although those who covered themselves quickly counterattacked by throwing javelins of light, forcing Issei to stop his walk and quickly create a wall of ice, followed by a protective magic circle. While Issei defended himself from the fallen angels' attacks, the devils took the opportunity to attack the fallen angels, mainly going for the wounded to safely lower their numbers. While most had no problems finishing them off, there were 3 who had difficulties doing so, among them, a dejected Asia, but due to the situation she tried to appear strong by healing her fellow demons. The others were a 17-year-old Rias, who limited herself, or rather, restrained herself in using her power of destruction, something that also happened with a 16-year-old Takeda, who seemed to have difficulties when it came to attacking those who were his enemies. Returning to Issei, the aforementioned was being overwhelmed by the fallen angels, who divided themselves to focus on the demons. Those who stayed to fight the masked man had no mercy when it came to throwing dozens of spears of light. Issei. Damn. this is going to be more complicated than I thought, he thought, somewhat frustrated, feeling blood leaking from his right leg. Finish him off at once, he's just a miserable human, ordered with force an attractive young woman who was flying in the skies with the help of 4 dark feather wings. Fallen angels. Understood, Miss Raynor, they exclaimed in unison, increasing the number of spells, managing to destroy the magic circle, and thus beginning to crack the ice wall. Issei. Mio needed a hand, he requested after thinking about it for a few moments, being aware that he couldn't dodge the spells even if he wanted to. Mio. There it goes, I communicate, forming a magic circle under where the fallen were, getting them to stop casting enchantments. Mio. Quick, go, she expressed spontaneously, to which without wasting time, Issei left the ice wall. Issei. Ooh, he shouted as he charged towards the fallen, to which the aforementioned did not flinch and went on the attack. Once face to face, Fallen 1-1 tried to hit Issei in the face, but he didn't count on Issei evading it by moving aside to grab the forearm of Fallen 1-2, who had a lightsaber in his hand. Both Issei and the fallen angel applied force through the luminous weapon, although the masked man abandoned that plan and proceeded to spin around in order to kick the fallen angel in the chest. 4, which made him step back and collide with the fallen angel. 3, forcing him to fall to the ground. But Issei quickly managed to duck, dodging a sword slash that would undoubtedly have cut off his head if he had taken a few more seconds, although Issei had to cross his arms in an X shape to receive a strong kick that sent him crawling away from where he was. Obviously Issei's arms hurt since he wasn't fully used to receiving blows from supernatural beings yet, but they would need more than that to finish him off. Fallen Angels 3 and 4 attacked Issei because they wanted to kill him at all costs due to the small humiliation they suffered at the hands of the brunette. The Fallen 3 went on the attack trying to hit Issei, although the brown-haired boy was able to deflect it and grab him by the arm. After that, Issei kicked one of the fallen angel's knees to make him fall. At that, Issei quickly channeled magic into his arm, which surrounded the fallen man's head to turn him from end to end, being able to hear the cervical crunch. Fallen 4. Damn you, he roared in anger, charging to attack Issei. The fallen angel began to attack in an uncoordinated manner due to fury, which gave Issei the advantage as he easily evaded the blows, trying to avoid blocking them as that would complicate things. However, things got complicated when the fallen angels regained the ability to use magic, mainly the fallen angel 4 who, after creating a spear of light and trying to attack Issei's face, caused a wound on the left side of his head. Not content with that, the fallen 4 proceeded to create another spear of light in his free hand, forcing Issei to fashion 2 short swords of ice, beginning an exchange of attacks that he would end up regretting accepting. Receiving all kinds of cuts on his body due to the superior capabilities of the fallen angel, even so, his movements continued to be clumsy and uncoordinated enough for Issei to be able to avoid cuts that threatened to end his life. However, having gotten used to that game, the fallen angel smiled in victory, proceeding to attack Issei's chest directly, ready to pierce him. Although to his surprise, Issei was able to deflect his attack, and with the other sword he had, he proceeded to stab the fallen man's chest. 4, to be more exact, his heart. Removing the weapon from the fallen one, after that, the body of the dark-winged being began to fall until it crashed against the ground, raising a bit of dust after that. Making his swords disappear, Issei turned around, being looked at sternly by the remaining fallen angels. Issei. Who, he expressed with adrenaline at its peak, ready to face any of the 4 that remained. However, the remaining fallen angels proceeded to pounce all 4 together, which Issei didn't care about and ran in their direction. Once close, Issei was able to knock down the fallen man. 5, following that, dodged a sword slash courtesy of the fallen man. 6, who received a blow on his left makeup from the masked man. But being held by the back, Issei tried to free himself until he felt something stick into his back, being the fallen 2 who held him and injured him, being about to do it again until Issei began to back away, forcing the fallen 2 to do so as well. And sooner rather than later, both of them fell to the ground, and even being there, Issei did not stay still and proceeded to create an ice dagger, thus stabbing the fallen man's stomach more than 5 times. 2. Getting up quickly, though in doing so, he used his forearm to repel a sword attack that was aimed at his head by the fallen one. Still, he ended up receiving a deep cut on his right cheek. Taking advantage of the lack of distance with the fallen angel, still with the ice knife in hand, Issei proceeded to stab him in his genitals, then his stomach, chest and finally one in the throat. However, Issei was forced to quickly turn around in order to grab the fallen man again. 6 by the forearm, which he decided to take advantage of to create another sword in his free hand. But reacting quickly, Issei quickly cut the tendon of the limb he was holding. Following that, he passed under the fallen angel, proceeding to make a deep cut in his abdomen, forcing him to hold that area so that his intestines would not escape. Diverting his attention and focusing on the last one he had left, the fallen one. 5, who was located at a considerable distance, began to throw dozens of spells, which Issei dodged with some difficulty, but without stopping his advance. And by the time he was close, the fallen angel lunged at Issei in an attempt to tackle him, however, a wall of ice stood in the way, surprising the fallen one. But that surprise ended when spikes of the same element emerged from the wall, impaling the fallen one who ended up like Swiss cheese. Making his enchantment disappear, Issei ignored the body of the fallen one that remained to focus on the face, being able to notice how the demons were able to defeat the rest of the fallen, not counting 2 more that remained, the strongest one and the other not so much. "There he is. Be careful," she warned the masked man in a worried voice from afar. At that, Issei sharpened his hearing, being able to hear the leaves of the trees moving abruptly as something approached with superhuman speed from behind. In the case of Rainer, who created a spear of light during her journey, being a matter of meters from reaching her target, the masked man being turned away and doubting that he could dodge it at the speed he was going. However, by the time he got close and tried to stab him in the back with his spear, the masked man stepped aside at the last second, causing him to miss and fall by surprise. "Rainer? What? There's no way he could have dodged me. It doesn't matter, he's injured so he won't last long," she thought confidently, turning around, daring to blink in the process. But when she opened her eyes, she was surprised to find that Issei was literally inches away from her, quickly using his dagger to pierce her neck, causing Rainer to open her eyes in shock. Removing the dagger and moving away from the fall, Issei could see how Rainer knelt before him, worrying about stopping the bleeding with her hands rather than anything else, having an expression full of fear and hopelessness, while Issei turned his gaze towards the strongest presence he felt. "Issei. Only he remains," he thought cautiously and alarmed, having the feeling that that being was completely different from the ones he faced recently, and having witnessed all of his tactics, he doubted that he could surprise him with anything. "Wonderful, wonderful indeed. To think that a human without the need for any blessing could defeat my servants. Either you are very strong or I hired a band of useless people," he commented calmly, being observed by a surprised Rainer who was still conscious on the ground. "Issei. Would you be surprised if I said I wasn't prepared for this?" he asked, trying to buy time to come up with some plan. "So they were much more than trash. Still, he noticed some potential in you. You don't hesitate, you don't talk, you get straight to the point and I like that, it's what I look for in a good soldier," he said with a certain pleasure in his voice, getting up from his throne of skulls to begin to descend towards Issei. "Cacabiel. Oh, yes, excuse my lack of manners. My name is Cacabiel. What is yours?" he asked interestedly as he descended from the sky. "Issei. Is it necessary?" he asked in order to prolong the conversation even more since he hadn't thought of anything yet. "Cacabiel. It depends. If you join me, rest assured that I will keep that in mind. Otherwise, if you go against me, I will only remember you as the human who made me consider who I hire," he replied relaxedly, unfolding a total of 10 dark feathered wings. "Issei. Frank Castle," he lied bluntly, making Cacabiel smile. "Cacabiel. All right, Frank, what do you say, are you joining me?" he asked without erasing his smile, extending his hand towards the masked man. Silence reigned in the place, all eyes were fixed on Issei to know what his answer would be. For his part, the brown-haired boy remained silent, as if he were meditating on the proposal. Until he began to walk towards Cacabiel at a slow pace, while, observing unheard from the ground, Rainer, still conscious, could not believe what her superior was doing. "Cacabiel. Excellent. I have expectations for you," he said happily as he watched Issei close the distance until he was standing next to him. "Issei. Do you want me to kill them all, my lord?" he asked helpfully, leaning forward a little. "Cacabiel. Take care of the rest." The Gremory and Citri heiresses are. Before he could finish his line, Issei tried to attack him with a dagger that was aimed at his eye. However, Issei was sent flying until he crashed into a tree, letting out an expression full of pain as he felt several of his bones break and gushes of blood came out of his mouth. The one responsible was Cacabiel with the help of one of his extended wings, which shrank to fit in with the others. After that, Cacabiel turned towards an Issei lying on the ground, spitting out a lot of blood. "Cacabiel. Did you really think you could stab me just like that? Even if you had succeeded, fighting with only one eye wouldn't have changed anything. On the other hand, what about you? You're tired, injured, and with your leg like that you won't get far," he said with a certain harshness in his tone, looking condescendingly at Issei. Standing, Issei wiped his mouth with the sleeve of his coat, focusing all his attention on Cacabiel. He wasn't going to lie to himself, he was aware that his destiny was death on this occasion. Even Mio, who normally helped him when the situation was difficult, this time, said little to nothing. He couldn't blame her either, since the presence that Cacabiel radiated was from another world. Even so, Issei gathered all the courage possible to rush towards Cacabiel, who, remaining impassive, raised a single finger, creating considerably enormous spears of light, which he threw towards the masked man. Despite their size, the spears were very fast, faster than those of the other fallen angels. Even so, with the help of his instincts and his 200% capabilities, Issei was able to evade them with difficulty, receiving cuts everywhere while not stopping his walk. Slightly surprised, Kakabiel didn't expect Issei to be able to dodge his attacks, however, he increased the amount a bit hoping to overwhelm him. Although it ended up being of no use, Issei continued to close the distance, and as he did so, he created two short swords of ice in both hands. By the time the two were face to face, Issei attacked Kakabiel with his daggers, though the fallen angel protected himself using two of his wings that received no damage. However, reluctant to stop, Issei continued to attack, while Kakabiel calmly defended himself, until little by little he was attacking using the same wings he was defending himself with. After a while, both were exchanging attacks, although no matter how hard he tried to apply force in order to maintain himself, Issei was unable to continue. Both physical and magical exhaustion were taking their toll, his wounds were taking their toll on him, and because of Kakabiel's enormous strength, his feet were sinking into the ground. But what stood out the most was the lack of openings in Kakabiel, the opposite of what happened with Issei, who received all kinds of cuts on his body, and that was despite Kakabiel using two of his 10 wings. Lowering the speed and strength of his attacks, Issei seemed to be giving up, receiving even more injuries than before, something that was noticed by Kakabiel, who put on a slightly disappointed expression. Kakabiel. I guess it was to be expected, he is a human after all, he thought calmly to use one of his wings and easily repel Issei's daggers. With his hands empty, Issei was completely helpless and unable to do anything on his own, so taking the opportunity, Kakabiel directed one of his wings in Issei's direction, ready to end his life once and for all. However, just when everyone had given up on the masked man, for some strange reason, Kakabiel missed the target. Even the fallen angel himself was surprised that he had missed, after all, there was no way that could have happened. Looking closer, Kakabiel noticed that Issei was barely leaning to the side, understanding why he missed his rapier. Before he could get back up, though, Issei took a step forward as he closed his hand and threatened to strike Kakabiel, who was surprised by that. Kakabiel. You should have tried something better than that, he thought, somewhat annoyed, throwing one of his wings in order to cut the masked man in half. As the two were about to carry out their attacks, the rest of those present watched in dismay at what Issei was trying to do, doubting that a simple punch could do anything. But just as Kakabiel's wing was about to cut Issei in half, the aforementioned took another step forward, barely dodging the limb that caused a cut to his lower back. Getting back to the matter at hand, Kakabiel didn't expect Issei to close the gap between them even further, being literally centimeters away. However, keeping calm, Kakabiel prepared the rest of his wings ready to stab him all at once, being aware that there would be no way for him to dodge it. However, Kakabiel witnessed as Issei positioned his closed fist in front of his face, disconcerting the fallen angel who didn't know what to expect. Until he noticed a certain glow coming out of the fist, diverting his gaze in surprise towards a smiling Issei. Kakabiel. This bratty pretended to be tired and took all my attacks, so I would lower my guard, he thought, surprised as he witnessed how Issei opened his hand, revealing a blinding light. Although Kakabiel was blinded by the light in front of his eyes, the rest of those present were not spared either, feeling forced to cover their eyes, unable to see anything. For his part, the spirits imprisoned Kakabiel, so taking advantage of the opportunity he had, Issei formed two ice daggers in order to finish him once and for all. However, his daggers couldn't pierce the fallen angel's tough flesh, not even when he tried to destroy its eyes. Without many options, Issei began to make several cuts on Kakabiel's body, which didn't help much. Frustrated, he didn't know what else to do until an idea came to his head, making his daggers disappear. Following that, Issei proceeded to channel all the magic he had in his fists. Once that was done, he hit Kakabiel in the face, causing him to turn his head at the same time, as strings of saliva mixed with blood escaped from his mouth. At that, Issei asked the spirits to throw Kakabiel to the ground, doing as requested in an abrupt manner, causing the ground to fill with cracks, while the brown-haired boy climbed on top of Kakabiel. Starting to savagely hit him in the face, continuing in this manner without caring about the blood that splashed on him or the bones in his hands that broke with each blow, he didn't care about anything at all. However, the detail that Issei missed was the duration of that light spell, which, as time passed, faded until everyone could see the scene in front of them. Thus, they witnessed how Issei was sent flying for the second time, although this time, he ended up embedded in the wall of the Kuo Academy, being completely out of the game after that. Kakabiel. I must admit, it wasn't bad at all, he praised, spitting blood with slight fragments of his teeth. After that, he wiped his mouth. Although Kakabiel was slightly injured, having bruises on his face and small cuts on different parts of his body, in the end it was just that, something light, there was nothing that could make him lose his life or anything like that. Heading towards an Issei who fell to the ground after being stamped. By the time he was in front of the masked man, Kakabiel kicked him, leaving him lying face up. Kakabiel. Say goodbye to this world, he warned threateningly, creating a spear of light in his hand. However, before Kakabiel could make a move, the barrier surrounding the entire academy was suddenly destroyed. Sensing a familiar presence, Kakabiel raised his head towards the skies, spotting a white dragon armor with blue gems embedded in it and blue wings. I came for you, Kakabiel declared a male voice inside the white armor. Kakabiel. White Emperor, if you're here, I guess Azazel must be nearby, he said with a frustrated expression, putting all his attention towards the man in white armor. White Emperor? That's irrelevant, he commented nonchalantly, lunging at Kakabiel. The fallen angel quickly brought his hand to his chest, but before he could do anything, his arm was severed as jets of blood began to flow out. Enduring the pain as if nothing had happened, Kakabiel turned around and found himself facing the White Emperor holding his severed limb. White Emperor? You were wrong to restrict your power. Although the result would be the same, with the difference that you would have entertained me, he commented calmly, throwing Kakabiel's arm to the ground, who was completely frustrated. And before he could make a move, the White Emperor appeared in front of Kakabiel, delivering a blow to his abdomen that left him breathless. But still not content with that, the white-armored man gave one last blow behind the nape of the fallen man's neck, ending up totally unconscious. There were no words for what the demons witnessed when they tried to confront Kakabiel. Things were totally complicated. They were literally children against an adult, and as if that wasn't enough, he contained part of his power, but still, they couldn't do much. As for Issei, it goes without saying, I never expected to do much knowing that Kakabiel was just playing with him and could have used magic at any time and killed him in a single attack. So when he saw a guy appear who could defeat Kakabiel in just 3 moves, he stopped to think that there were even stronger beings and that he had no chance of winning or getting out alive against them. Meanwhile, the person in the armor carried Kakabiel like a sack of potatoes and did the same with an unconscious Rainer. White Emperor. See you later, he said as he took flight. Are you just going to ignore me, White? Questioned a helpless voice coming from a gem on the left arm of a 17-year-old Takeda. Greg. I thought you still hadn't woken up, a deep voice commented from the wings of the white armor. Albion, you know very well that if you are awake, somewhere in the world I will be awake too. It has always been like this, Drake stated with confidence in his words. Even if you say it like that, I have been fortunate to end up with a wielder worthy of my power. Instead, what have you achieved, Albio questioned somewhat provocatively. Not today, not tomorrow either, but in the future, my companion will surpass yours, Drake declared firmly. That is if he manages to survive our inevitable confrontation, Albion stated, cutting off all communication as did Drake. White Emperor. If you are my opponent with whom I must fight to the death, you disappoint me. If you couldn't against Kakabiel, who was restricting himself, then you would die, he warned with severity in his words, leaving everyone speechless. White Emperor. Even if it doesn't seem like it, I am patient. So train, so that at least our battle will be entertaining, he said, and then left the place flying. Watching the figure of the White Emperor fade away into the distance, everyone returned to the real world to focus on their surroundings, seeing the corpses of Kakabiel's minions. Although they ignored the bodies in order to fix their eyes on Issei, who was barely able to walk, his breathing was heavy, and despite his dark clothing, the blood he was losing was noticeable. Riaz. Hey, wait, Asia, go heal him, he ordered, and the nun went to attend to him without blinking, not being able to leave an injured ally to his fate. Asia. Don't move, I can't heal you this way, she said worriedly at the blood that the person in front of her was losing. Issei. No need, he expressed, somewhat exhausted, passing by a surprised Asia upon recognizing the aforementioned man's voice. Asia. Murdoch, she called uncertainly, turning around to see how the masked man had stopped dead. Asia. Is it really you? She asked, carefully observing Issei, who simply turned his head in her direction. Issei. So what if I am? He returned the question somewhat seriously, continuing on his way, until Asia intervened. Asia. I won't move from here unless you let me heal you, she stated firmly, looking sharply at the brown-haired boy, who, being aware of her poor condition, made a decision. Issei. So I just do it already, he expressed, leaving his words in the air and sitting on the ground. Taking off the handkerchief that hid his face, Issei revealed his messy hair, his face covered in sweat and very noticeable bruises, leaving Asia very surprised by what she saw. But regaining her composure, Asia approached Issei, proceeding to put their hands together. As she did so, a green glow was expelled from a pair of rings that Asia had on. Feeling a surge of warmth, Issei relaxed completely, even closing his eyes as if he was about to fall asleep. On the other hand, Asia saw how the bruises on her friend's face were disappearing in a matter of seconds. Asia. At no time did I see him receive a blow to the face. Or maybe he has them from before. She thought somewhat dismayed, finishing healing Issei's face in order to heal his wounded leg. Asia. Could it be that Murdoch really is the masked man who fights crime, she thought, carefully observing Issei. His clothing and the scarf he was wearing were identical to those shown in the media. Riaz. Asia, how's everything going? She asked, catching the attention of the aforementioned, who, without stopping healing Issei, turned her head to witness how her mistress approached in her direction. Asia. There's a little bit left, Sister Riaz, she answered with confidence in her words, while Issei, upon hearing Riaz's name, quickly got up from the ground to Asia's surprise, who saw how the brown-haired boy took a defensive stance. Both Riaz and Sona were alarmed by the sudden movement of the one they believed to be an ally, but upon seeing his face in more detail, both heiresses opened their eyes in shock. On the other hand, her servants, realizing what was happening, quickly approached the scene to find out what was happening. When they arrived, most of them were baffled by what was happening, although Raruko was speechless when she discovered that her classmate participated in the fight against Kakabiel. However, Takeda and Kurumi, who were also there, were stunned when they saw the face of the person in front of them, although stopping to look at him in more detail, they realized that they were being very hasty, having confused the boy in front of them with their younger brother. Without abandoning his stance, Issei remained extremely cautious. Although Asia had healed certain wounds on his body, he still had others that caused him to lose blood, and a considerable number of bones were broken. As if that were not enough, the exhaustion he felt was not comparable to previous situations, only when he began the search for the murderer of his foster parents. Getting back to the topic, Issei was surrounded, so starting a fight would only end in a certain defeat. Although before things got out of hand, Asia stepped in the middle with her arms outstretched to the sides, watching Issei. Asia. Issei, stop, they are friends, she said, somewhat agitated, while Riaz, Sona, Takeda and Kurumi were shocked to hear her name. Her face, her pale eyes, and even her name, everything was already a cruel coincidence for the heiresses and the Haidu twins. Still, steeling herself, despite her insecurities, Kurumi advanced until she was in front of Asia. Kurumi. Brother. Is that you? She asked with a hand on her chest, hoping that the person in front of her really was her brother. However, Issei only limited himself to sharpening his gaze and putting on a stern expression at his sister's words. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.